Hello, this is Storybooks channel. New videos are posted every day. Subscribe and click the bell.
It's nice when childhood friends have the same kind of life. Michael thought as he drove to the restaurant where Charles was waiting for him. If Charles were less successful, what would they have to talk about? Rich people can't be friends with poor people, even if they want to. It doesn't work out. Envy interferes here, an involuntary demonstration of prosperity, and what is the worst of all is the realization that your friend, with whom you fished for moths in childhood, is a common lazy and weakling? Yes, Michael, by the time he was 35 years old, had acquired several unshakable beliefs. The first and most important of them said that poverty in 8 cases out of 10, the consequence of laziness and lack of character, but fortunately, all this was not about him and Charles. Each had risen in his own way. Michael ran his own contemporary dance theater. Charles' business was darker, but in the end, it was the one that would survive any crisis. Charles owned a funeral home. Yes, the festive atmosphere of the Michael Theater is not comparable, but it's also a necessary business. How can you stand it all? Michael once asked a friend. After all, every day you come to work, and there are coffins, morgue, makeup artists' dead makeup, and loved ones weeping in the ritual hall. That can make you depressed, can't it? Charles shrugged. Depressed? Maybe you can get depressed, but personally, I prefer to get philosophical. People die whether we want them to or not. So the employees do their best to see a person off with dignity and cause as little trouble to their loved ones as possible. They can mourn their loss in peace. Don't think it's better to be distracted. Then you won't feel the pain. First of all, lying, and secondly, pain is important to feel, Michael. You know how it often happens. A person drives his grief inside, tries to drown it out with troubles, and then bang, and the asylum. It's just as important to be able to grieve as it is to be able to rejoice. That's what I think. And we give those who have had such grief a chance to experience it without being distracted by things like finding a costume for the deceased, finding a makeup artist, or finding a place in the cemetery. After listening to his friend's speech, Michael didn't argue. There was nothing to argue about. Charles was right. It was just that not everyone could accept his almost philosophical truth. Just in case, Michael decided not to talk to his friend any more about his work. After all, they had enough to talk about. Charles was waiting for him, passing the time with a glass of wine and a telephone conversation. He was probably dealing with some issues related to his monstrous business. But when he saw his friend, he immediately hung up the phone and stood up. Hello, Michael. The old friends hugged. Look at you, you haven't abandoned the gym. Michael smirked, poking his fist into Charles's steel biceps. Do you want to be young forever? I can't keep up with you. He was not in debt. Good for you. Still doing Botox, and I still do not dare. I'm sorry. Michael sighed with courtly sadness. Nobody gets any younger. You've already got silver in your hair, and I think you'll be bald soon. It was a typical exchange of courtesies, which no meeting was without. Having finished with this introductory part, the friends finally sat down at the table. Did you call me here for nothing, or for business? Michael asked. But why do I ask? It is clear that it was business. Otherwise, I would have come just to visit, right? Right? Charles smiled. I've got something to do with you, and it's strictly male. Your Betty doesn't need to know about it. You see, I met this girl a few months ago. Michael chuckled understandingly. And now you don't know how to break up with her? You guessed, but Charles shook his head. No, I know that, but this is different. He began to tell the story slowly, in detail, and Michael, listening to his friend, suddenly remembered their childhood together. Charles had always been like that, trying to consider every situation in detail, taking into account all the circumstances, and only then to decide something. There was no spontaneity in him, but he always made a very balanced decision and was rarely wrong. Do you remember when I decided to take a vacation at Christmas? Charles told me. I went to Thailand for 2 weeks. It was beaches, clubs, beaches. I met her at one of the clubs. Pretty girl, legs, breasts. A stripper dancer? Michael asked. Charles nodded. Yeah, well, they're at work, and it's forbidden to show affection. But I could see that she was looking at me. She liked me. All right, I guess I don't care. I'm a free man. I waited until she came home from work, and that's how we met. She turns out to be American. Name's Nancy. And of course, she didn't go into this dance for the good life. And that's where it all started. And then I said to her, "Why are you hanging around here?" "Why don't you come with me?" She agreed. I got her an apartment and everything was fine for a month and a half, and then I realized it wasn't my thing. Yeah, she got cold too. I could see that. And it started, she doesn't like everything and everything is boring and cold. Anyway, it's time for us to break up. Well, I don't get it, Michael. So break up. What's stopping you? Charles didn't answer at once, sipped more wine, thought for a moment. You see, he finally said, Nancy is from a small town, simple family. I've shown her a beautiful life, and now I'm going to leave her. What's she gonna do? She's gonna look for a richer daddy and end up in a dump. You know how it is, don't you? I'd really like her to have something she likes to do, to live a decent life, respecting herself. And there, you see, she'll find a good, proper guy, a family will be formed. She once said that she always dreamed of dancing in some decent place. Maybe there's a place for her in your theater. Michael thought for a moment. I'm more on the commercial side of things, Charles. He said that he's in charge of choreography. We seem to have a full company, but I'd like to see your Nancy. Maybe we can put her somewhere, at least in the Corps de Ballet, and then if she shows herself. Charles smiled. I knew you'd say that. That's why I asked you to come. She's on her way. Michael suddenly noticed that a tall brunette in a red dress was approaching their table. He went up to meet her and froze, unable to say anything. Wonderful dark hair fell in waves on her shoulders. Her coffee-colored eyes with raised corners attracted, lured, promised. And the girl also had magically beautiful golden skin. Is that her? Hoarsely, he asked Charles. Is that her? The girl walked over to them and leaned over to kiss Charles on the cheek. What Michael noticed at that deep cleavage made his breath hitch. Meet Nancy, said Charles. This is my old friend Michael. He runs the contemporary dance theater. The beautiful girl turned to Michael and cast a languid glance at him from under her thick lashes. Charles told me about you. Her voice was soft and intimate, as if she were whispering with him in the bedroom between kisses rather than greeting a stranger. I've been wondering about you too. He awkwardly popped up from the table to pull back a chair for Nancy. Allow me to sit down. The girl thanked him with a smile, and that smile made Michael almost physically feel the tickling sparks run through his body. This had never happened to him before, never. He didn't notice his friend's anxious gaze on him, didn't notice the waiters smirking visibly as they passed their table. You, Charles, said you were a dancer. Nancy, let's not talk about that. Charles interrupted her. The bar and the forfeitures are in the past. We're here to think about how we can get you back to dancing. Michael, who until then had been serving as if mesmerized, seemed to stumble over these words. Really, how? To do it bypassing Betty was impossible. Then how should he be? Lose Nancy, that bird of paradise? Not at all. He must find a way to keep her with him. We'll think of something, he promised the girl. Tomorrow, say, by 11 o'clock, come to the theater, show yourself to our ballet master, and we'll think together what we can do for you. Now I must go too. Charles came up at once. Nancy, you stay. Order whatever you like. Have it put on my account. They went outside, and Michael was surprised to note that it was already dark. He had lost track of time. But of course he had kept his eyes on Nancy, so where could he have seen anything? Betty must be waiting. He muttered unhappily, thinking of his wife. Michael. Charles looked at him shrewdly. You have a great wife. You remember that? Okay. Don't forget that. Michael became alarmed. Was he so obviously in love that even Charles had noticed? That's the last thing we need. Why did he just say that? He asked, trying to convey in his voice the surprise of a faithful husband who was suddenly suspected, unjustly of course, of sympathizing with a strange woman. Charles did not hold back a chuckle. As a man, I understand you. He answered calmly. Anyone would fall for Nancy. I've been through it myself. But I'll tell you frankly, it's too expensive to take her seriously. She's not worth a Betty nail. Don't be mad. I'm being friendly. Are you trying to piss me off in a friendly way? Michael grinned. Come on, I'm not stupid. I wouldn't trade my Nancy for anyone. Okay, bye. I'll say hello to my wife for you. Nancy picked at her salad with her fork without interest and pushed her plate away. There was no appetite at all. This Michael had obviously had his eye on her. Now he would do anything to get her a job in his theater. Now it was important to play her cards right, to keep his attention, and most importantly, to warm him up, not being stingy with advances. Then soon she will become not just a pretty puppet, as it has been so far, but a significant, wealthy person. It was a pity, of course, that Charles would have to be parted with. She liked him, but he was too independent, not easy to control. But Michael, something told her, would be the kind of man she could make ropes out of, and that was just what she needed. Nancy nodded to the waiter. Take the salad away and bring me a bolognese with mushrooms in a cream sauce and a red wine of your choice. I don't know anything about alcohol. Anything else? The waiter asked politely. Cucumber and tomato salad, shouted Nancy, with greens and mayonnaise dressing. Don't ask stupid questions and carry my order. Her mood improved a little. Life is a zebra. Not long ago, she was striptease dancing and living in a filthy doghouse on the backside of civilization, and then she met Charles, and now she lives in a nice, albeit small, apartment and dines at a restaurant. That's great. And when she realized she was losing interest in Charles, she didn't have time to feel bad, but Michael came along. And with him, she's got a good chance of making a name for herself. No, this was definitely working out very well. Nancy took a sip of wine and smiled. This wine was good. Tart, moderately sweet, and at least it was a reminder of what living people ate and drank. Dancers are supposed to watch their figure, but how human is that? Eating nothing but chicken breast or leaf lettuce? In her youth, Nancy loved fries, as Michael had expected. Betty was beginning to worry. Of course she didn't make a scene. It wasn't in her nature. Michael couldn't remember if there had been any fights in their married life. It seemed they had never had any. Now Betty was reading a book quietly and showed no signs of irritation at the sight of her husband. I was beginning to worry a little in case something happened. She smiled. Why didn't you call? I'm sorry, Nancy. Michael touched her cheek lightly with his lips. Nancy, so simple, so warm, like the cornflower that grows by the house. You look at it and you feel better, because it's familiar, it's native, it's familiar. Even the appearance of his wife was some kind of peaceful nose, lips, hair, no sharp line, no bright contrasts. Blue eyes, russet waves of hair, skin, a little touched with tan, everything in moderation, all harmonious. That's what he always said about Betty, or maybe she just wasn't any good. Out of the blue, Michael thought, and was startled by the thought. No, that's nonsense. Nancy is great. Loyal, honest, hardworking. Constant after all, and that's a lot by our standards. Yes, women like that are worth their weight in gold. This inner monologue calmed him down a little, and Michael even managed to smile at his wife. "I am so happy when you are waiting for me at home," he said almost sincerely. "I was late because Charles took me to a cafe in the evening. I was on my way home when he intercepted me." Well, she seemed genuinely upset. "Charles, why didn't you ask him to come over? It's been 100 years since we've seen each other. A childhood friend. Don't be angry with him." Michael laughed. "He'd like to see you too, and he sends his regards to you. But you see, this time he had a request, a delicate one in general. So he was sure you'd say no. By the way, I'm sure of it too, and I told him that right away, but he made me promise that I'd talk to you anyway." "What kind of a request is that?" "What did he want? Help hide a body, rob a bank, what?" No, it's much simpler than that. He wanted a girl he knew to join our troupe." "Who's the girl?" Betty asked. Here it was necessary to be very careful not to arouse the slightest suspicion. Michael poured himself some water and sat down across from his wife. "I think it's his mistress," he said nonchalantly. "I didn't ask for details, but I guessed something. He pulled her out of some back alley, cleaned her up, fed her. Charles says it would be good to put her to work, so you know, how long before trouble? It's a pity, isn't it? But if he's so worried about her, the wife says he could help her get an education, then get a job. Michael, I understand and even support Charles. He is good that he doesn't want to leave the girl to her fate, but why does he want to place her with us? And she dreams of dancing with us, and she seems to have some training. I don't think she's that talented, but a friend asked her to do it. You should see her tomorrow. Maybe we can find something for her." Well, Nancy drummed her knuckles on the table thoughtfully, beat out some kind of dance rhythm. "If Charles asked me to, I'll try to do something and stick it somewhere. So you're saying hardly a talent? Well, what about her looks, or you haven't seen her?" "Why not?" "I have." Michael nodded. "But to be honest, I didn't pay much attention. What am I supposed to do? Notice all the Charles women. She must be pretty. So we have a deal. Will you put her with us?" Betty shrugged. "I can't promise a concert lineup," she said, "but let her come in, rehearse. We'll start with the Corps de Ballet and see how she does." "Thank you, darling." Michael shone. "Then I'll rinse and go to bed. I'm tired." Only when he was alone, locked in the bathroom, could he finally relax and congratulate himself on his victory. Betty, apparently, did not suspect anything, even promised to help. This, of course, was not without mentioning the magical Charles' name. Yes, childhood friendships either end with childhood or last a lifetime. But the important thing was, it all worked out. He'd had that dangerous conversation with his wife, and he'd won. Well, that's great. Good for him. Michael realized that today he hadn't just managed to fool his wife. He had fulfilled his friend's request, and at the same time he had gotten Nancy in close proximity to him. Now she would be there for him. Strangely enough, he was thinking of her calmly now, without fever. This girl was so impossibly beautiful it seemed like a dream. Perhaps tomorrow, when they saw each other again, he would wonder what he had found in this sweet, but in general ordinary girl yesterday. After all, it was likely that in the daylight it would appear that she had a pimple on her forehead, or even several, or that her lips were peeling. Michael thought about it and hoped that that was exactly what would happen. Never in his life had he thought he would be so eager for disappointment. But it was the only thing that could help now, because if tomorrow's meeting didn't disappoint him, how could he live then? And Nancy, the nightmare came again. She returns to her native town, but finds it deserted. The houses on the streets familiar from her childhood stand with their windows open in winter, and behind them there is darkness and silence. And it is immediately clear that there is no one there, not a soul. Only an old merry-go-round creaking in the yard and spinning by itself, as if ghosts were riding on it. At this point Nancy always woke up and lay with her eyes open for a long time, still hearing that frightening, dead creak. This damned dream wore her nerves out at intervals of about once every few months, and she couldn't get used to it. Tonight's nightmare was unusual. There were new details in it. Walking through the empty city, Nancy kept turning around, someone calling her name. She still couldn't recognize the voice, though it seemed familiar. And then suddenly, unexpectedly, she realized that these responses someone's evil joke, to frighten her completely, so that she would never be able to leave this place. She decided to ignore them then, but whoever had come up with this prank wasn't stupid either. Now she was distracted from all sides, and the voices calling for her multiplied, echoing, giggling. Nancy squatted down beside the very creaking carousel and covered her ears with her hands. And then she woke up. "I'm never going back there," she thought. Over and over she said that soothing mantra, and it usually worked, but today something went wrong. Nancy tangled herself in the blanket and went into the kitchen. Tea. The girl promised herself. Strong, with milk and sugar and cookies. She wanted to chase away the cold sadness of her dream, to warm herself, to remind herself of the present, of the troubled city outside the window, of the chocolate chip cookies, of being in the past. It's like you're here and not here. Charles once said, like you're in two worlds at once. Nonsense. She smiled. She didn't want to admit that he was right, even to herself. And that's the way she lived. That's right. There was an outside world in which you had to be able to spin to get anywhere, and another world that Nancy never told anyone about. In that secret world of hers, her favorite cat, Marquise, was alive, and a shaggy black dog ran around the yard barking. There, in summer, lupines and lion's eye grew along the fence, and in winter, the snow was white as a downy blanket. Nancy, a girl from the suburbs, in a chintz sundress and sandals, was tilling the beds and looking at the gate. Soon her friend would come to pick her up, and together they would run to the dance class at the local house of culture. She had once met Mason there after a concert. She hurried down the stairs, and as if she ran into an invisible wall when she saw him. How handsome he was! Blue eyes like the sea she had only seen in pictures. He was so tall that she had to throw her head back to look at his face. Mason noticed this and went down a couple of steps. "I saw you on stage," he said, smiling. The smile was so cheeky that Nancy laughed. "He's a lousy liar and he doesn't care." "What dress was I wearing?" she asked, hoping to catch him out, but the trick failed. "Red." The boy answered without hesitation. "You had a flower pinned behind your ear." "Right here." He jokingly tugged on her ear. "Come on, I'll walk you home." It's getting late." He threw his jacket over her shoulders, took her hand, and led her home like a little girl. It was so unusual, funny, but also very, very exciting. Nancy saw the eager curiosity with which the passing girls looked at Mason. She was walking down the street for the first time with a young man who was not her, neither relative nor classmate, walking straight as a couple. Awkwardly, she joked, "So we are a couple." Mason answered as if he took it for granted, and then when it was dark, they kissed for a long time at the gate of the Nancy house, and the girl didn't care that now rumors were sure to spread around their private sector. Let them talk. What did it matter if the most long-awaited adventure in the world, love, happened to you? Within a week they were considered both bride and groom, and after another month, Mason climbed over the fence at night and knocked on their sleeping bedroom window. "What?" she asked in her sleep, but when she saw Mason's pale face with drops of sweat on his forehead, she realized, "There's trouble. I've lost my money, Nancy." He barely uttered it, his lips quivering. The girl silently poured water into a mug and handed it to him. The guy greedily drank the water to the drop and wiped his mouth with the palm of his hand. He said, "I'll give it to you, you fool. So give it back." She still didn't know what he was talking about. "Give it back and be done with it." Mason groaned, clutching his head. "What kind of a fool are you, Nancy? I have no money. I played on credit. Now if I don't pay it back, I'll be cut to pieces." "All right." He took a breath and looked at Nancy with sore, inflamed eyes. "The thing is, Nancy, I've got to go away today now." "I'm sorry, okay? Forget it." "Wait." Nancy touched his forehead and wiped away the sweat. "Wait, Mason, what do you mean, forget it? How much money do they need?" "I'll get it." "Where?" He shouted in a whisper. "Where will you get it?" "Tell me where. We'll find them somewhere." She threw off her nightgown and in a minute was standing dressed to go out. "Let's go," she called out in a whisper. "Let's go out the window." The only man with money the girl knew was the choreographer of their dance club, William. Where did he get the money from? No one really knew. True, it was said that he distilled moonshine and sold it, but Nancy paid no attention to these conversations. Moonshine existed outside her world, and so did the people who needed it. "William." She knocked on the choreographer's window. There was a light on and voices coming from the room. "Is he having company?" "William, it's Nancy." Mason hissed something indistinctly. "Nancy?" "Yeah, shut up," she whispered at him. "William, I have a favor to ask of you." "I have no one else to go to, please." The window opened. "What do you want, Nancy?" The choreographer asked unhappily. "You're making a racket in the middle of the night under an honest man's window." "William, I want money." Nancy blurted it out without saying anything in vain. The room outside the window was filled with men's laughter. William waved his hand carelessly at his guests, and all was quiet. "I need some." The girl continued. "I need... Mason, how much do you need?" She looked over her shoulder, but she didn't see her friend. "Mason!" She yelled across the street, forgetting the time of day. "Mason! Mason! There he is," the choreographer said calmly, seeing the pale, shaking fellow peering out from around the corner of the house. William looked with visible disgust at Mason's lanky figure and disheveled hair. "You a shoal! Here she is, running around at night in other people's houses, looking for money to borrow. And you're afraid to show your face in public. Is that you?" He turned to Nancy. "Because of him, he needs money?" The girl nodded. "All right, hang on. I'll be right out." "Come on, Nancy." Pulled her sleeve by the guy, She silently pulled her arm out. The door opened and William, dressed in a homemade tracksuit, stepped leisurely onto the porch. "And he's for you, maiden, you're my red one," he began, glaring at the boy's haggard face. "Did he tell you who he owed what to?" "No, it's nothing. I'll tell you that. He owes me, Nancy. And you're a fool. You'd better go to bed than run around at night. No one forced him to play. It was his own fault. Let him clean up his own mess. William, I'll do it." Nancy said firmly, "Would you like me to clean for you? Come to your house? I can cook and tend the garden. And you'll die of old age before you pay off his." The choreographer pointed his finger at the silent Mason. "Debt, and he'll make new ones in the meantime, that you'll always have to work for his foolishness. Do you know what a gambler is, Nancy? Take some good advice. Go home to bed, lie down and forget it. Forget that ashhole." "I won't," she shouted. "You, William, what have you got in your life besides work?" "No wife, no kids, and I know you're in love. So why can't you see who you've fallen in love with? There's your beloved standing there, silent. He's the one who's setting you up right now. He's not the one who's thinking about how to get money, and he's not the one who's offering to work it off. It's you. And he's standing there like a lamb of God, offended, waiting for you to do everything for him. You're a total, all right." He cut himself off. "You can't hear a damn thing. All right, you want to help him, I'll send you overseas. I got a friend who runs a bar there. You'll work for him as a dancer. He'll give you a place to live. You won't have to pay for it. We'll split your salary, half for you to live on, half for your dog's debts. Do you agree? No? Make up your mind quickly. People are waiting for me. Agreed?" Nancy didn't hesitate. And only then, on the way home, she suddenly realized that now there was no turning back. Soon she would leave here, and for 2 years she would not see these streets, or her room, or her lover, not even her cat and dog, and those she would not see. Mason walked silently along beside her. Nancy longed for him to encourage her, to say something affectionate, or at least to take her hand. But he kept on walking, raking the gravel with his feet, and sighing heavily from time to time. "Will you wait for me?" the girl asked timidly. He only sniffed his nose. "Where could I go?" "I'll wait for you, of course. When you come back, we'll get married." Nancy smiled slightly. Married. Now it would be a little easier for her to get through these 2 years. It's always easier when there's something to look forward to. The gravel under their feet rustled a little too loudly for a summer night. She'd given the house she lived in to Mason, and not without a hidden agenda. Let everything around it remind him of her. Nancy had hoped her lover would call her every day, but alas, there was trouble with that. She called more often, and the fiancé said he had something urgent to do. "I got a job at the motor pool." Reluctantly, he said into the phone. "Well, you have to work. What's to live on?" "Okay, Nancy, I have to send the guys on a trip by." She felt she couldn't help but feel that something was wrong. She wanted to drop everything to go home, but what was left of her paycheck was only enough for the most meager of meals. The owner of David's bar smiled wickedly at her requests for a raise. "You see, Nancy, I'm not making any profit. I don't get many customers, only locals. What can I get out of them? You know we feed off tourists, and it's the off-season. Where am I going to scrape you up?" And then he lowered his voice. "You figure it out? The other girls will find out I'm paying you more. They'll demand a pay raise for themselves. What am I, an oligarch, a Danish prince? No, Nancy. Don't you even come to me with that question. Vaughn, you want to have a drink on me? Let's call it a night." Luckily, some 10th darling, Charles, came out to their rundown bar, and seeing the beautiful stripper in no time, arranged everything with David. A few days later, Nancy was already pacing the dusty, nothing here in 2 years has changed, road to her house. The gate was unlocked. Nancy entered the yard and did not hear a cheerful dog barking, and the dog kennel had gone somewhere. She looked around confused, not recognizing her home nest, and didn't immediately understand what had happened here. The hulk of the house, burned black, stuck out in front of the girl, and only the surviving porch was almost untouched by the fire. And on this porch, she had once liked to sit with a mug of milk and a piece of bread. The porch was dear to her. Except now, it led nowhere. "You're back. Haven't seen you in a while." Nancy looked back and saw her neighbor at the gate. Yeah, nothing's changed. And Aunt Miranda is still the same round, and her kerchief on her head is still the same, white with a pretty blue flower. Nothing changes and everything changes. "Hello, Miranda." "What's this here?" The woman sighed heavily and waved her hand. "Can't you see?" "Oh, trouble, trouble. It's your Mason." Drunkenly set a fire. The whole street piled in. They barely put it out. They helped the fireman. How? "He was out here with some girls." Nancy shuddered. "Who with?" "You're lying, Aunt Miranda. And shame on you, you're a grown woman." But the neighbor was not embarrassed. "Ask anyone." She gestured around the street. "As soon as you left, he started walking the devil. And then he burned down the whole house and went into the bushes. And you say I'm lying." "They say." "What do they say?" The girl interrupted. "Aunt Miranda?" "What?" "They say, what's there to hide? They say he married a rich woman, the market director's daughter. Lisa, is that her? She's fat, fat, fat. Why should she be thin if she's not poor? Why not eat with Daddy's money?" The whole town was buzzing at their wedding at the best restaurant in town. Mason was unrecognizable. He used to be a simple guy, and now he's looking down, saying hello through his lip. And that Lisa, the fat girl, she's all over him, just clinging to him. "Huddle, you say?" She remembered Lisa from their dance class. She was a fat, clumsy girl who couldn't repeat even the simplest movements, but for some reason she was always included in the concert lineups and was even given leading parts. Of course, the girls whispered among themselves, but no one openly resented her. Everyone knew who Lisa's daddy was, and they also knew that once a week on Saturdays, a car driven by the market directors came to their house of culture and began the planned distribution of delicacies. There and the director of the House of Culture and choreographers and even janitors. Even the alcoholic janitor was not forgotten. She necessarily brought 2 bottles of white and red wine, a few bottles of vodka, and necessarily beer bottle 10. Such an island of abundance in a separate House of Culture. And this is the coffer her Mason married? And she's the one clinging to him? I can't believe it. I can't believe it. Nancy muttered. Aunt Miranda nodded sorrowfully. That's the thing about us. Believe it or don't believe it. I'm just telling it like it was. Dad sent them on a honeymoon, too. That's what my friend told me. You know she works at the airport. She saw them there herself. She issued the tickets for them, and they have the same surname now, and she saw the rings with her own eyes. I see, Nancy replied dryly. Where were they flying to? The neighbor hesitated. I don't remember. I'm sort of in the... But what do you mean? With a T? I think it's a word. Thailand? That's what the girl said. Thailand. Thank you for the story. Aunt Miranda, I'll be off. The woman looked after her, furrowing her brow and whispering something silently. Either she was praying for something, or she was reading. With Mason, they, strangely enough, met the same day. On the way out of town, Nancy stopped for gas. Suddenly she saw Mason in a nearby auto. He turned at the sight of her, and his face contorted with annoyance. "Holy shit," it came out of his mouth. Nancy, ignoring this peculiar greeting, nodded discreetly. "Hello, Mason." "Good day to you, too. I see you're back already. How did you like it in Thailand?" "As for me, it's a bit hot there, and insects can bite. Your wife didn't complain, did she?" He averted his eyes. "Why are you organizing all this?" he asked reproachfully. "Why? Don't you understand anything?" He spoke so tiredly and so disappointed. "I don't understand." Nancy raised her voice. "But I understand the other thing very well. I understand that I spent almost 2 years twisting my ass in front of a drunk to pay off your car debts. I also realized that I ate every meal and lived in a room with cockroaches, but I thought it was nothing. My sweet Mason is waiting for me at home. I realized that I was counting small things. I forgot about sleepy rest and thought about everything. I don't care. My darling is waiting for me at home, and my darling burned down my house. So I don't have a home anymore. And my lover doesn't bother me either. And why should he think about me now? He has a different social circle than before. And he married someone else. That's what I mean. And what are you talking about? No, I don't understand. I've become stupid. Did I ask you to do that?" He exploded. "Did I ask you to do that? Think about it. You made up your own mind. And now it's my fault. You know what, Nancy, you better blame yourself. Don't confuse me with that. You're a sacrificial lamb. You traded your maiden honor for your lover, and he didn't appreciate it. I'm weeping from injustice." Finishing his furious tirade, Mason took a snow-white handkerchief from his pocket and wiped his forehead with it. "You're making my blood pressure rise," he said pitifully. "And I told you you'd wait," said the girl, and her voice treacherously trembled. "I said I'd come and we'd get married." Mason grinned cynically and harshly, which made his face, so still beautiful and young, disfigured and as if at once aged. "What did you think I was supposed to say? That I didn't want a prostitute fiancée? That the girl I loved for a moment decided stripping was a good thing? That it was a disrespectful thing to marry her? Is that what I'm supposed to tell you? All right, Nancy, that's it. We've had our talk and that's it. Go where you're going." So that was the end of the story, Nancy thought. As if it wasn't about her first love, but about a book she'd read. Nancy never once allowed herself to cry, though tears choked her all the way back. And then, when she was already sitting in the apartment she had rented and waiting for Charles, they met once more, and again quite by chance. Nancy and Charles were at the theater, and suddenly Nancy caught someone's gaze from a nearby box. Looking closer, she recognized Mason surrounded by his new family. His wife's parents, eager to look like avid theatergoers and therefore pompous to the point of ridiculousness. The wife, Lisa, was there, still as fat and thickly made up as before, except that she was wearing more diamonds. She clutched tightly the hand of her beloved husband, Mason, and minute by minute she was fixing his hair or shaking off invisible dust from his shoulder. She did not look at the stage at all. Mason was obviously bored. In addition to the fact that he was drawn to the ceremonial image, his hand now and then flew to his throat to loosen the knot of his tie. And, as Nancy noticed, he wasn't used to jackets either. He was always fidgeting with his sleeves and could never get comfortable. Once, when he took his wife's hand away from his hair, he looked at his own palm squeamishly. Social life was new to all of them. Charles leaned over and whispered in her ear, "Who's that guy?" "He's in the next box, staring at you." Nonsense, she whispered back, a classmate. At intermission, Nancy left the box and immediately ran into Mason. It was as if he'd been waiting for her there. Watching, he smiled. Aren't you lost in this life? Social life, theaters, ballets found my place in the big city. I wish you the same. The girl chirped carefree. Mason remained unperturbed. Who's that in the box with you? Daddy? He's all right, but he's old, Nancy, old. You're losing your touch. Does he keep you on your money, though? Spoils you. As much as he spoils you with your piggy bank. By the way, are you living well under her watchful eye? I hope you haven't run up any new debts, have you? Mason shrank back at these words, and Nancy saw his fingers fidget, fumbling along the buttons of his jacket. So you're in debt again. Satisfied, the girl said, and returned to her box. Late that night, Mason, frankly drunk and miserable, began to cut off her cell phone. I didn't want to marry Lisa. He scratched the phone. Believe it, Nancy, I even thought about running away. But her father has money, and you know what I am. A gambling addict who burned down my house. Nancy said coldly, Oh, yes, I was so ashamed of you. You did it for me, and I couldn't wait for you. And I couldn't play the game. You know how I sit down to play? I think I'm gonna get lucky, and then I'll be on the first plane to Thailand, pick you up, and we'll get married. Nancy, can you hear me, Nancy? I can, she said. And then, after I got married, I was afraid to meet you. I was ashamed to the point of having nightmares about you. My wife took me by the scruff of the neck and took me to the doctors. I spent a month in a psychiatric hospital. They all examined me, twisted and turned, and so gave me some pills, but the dreams did not stop. I just stopped being afraid of them, that's all. She grinned. Then they let me out after all, and I smelled that I would see you soon. I was walking and frightened of my own shadow. I thought you might pop out of every corner, but we met at a gas station. Nancy, don't believe what I told you the other day. I'm sick to my stomach myself. You know, remember, I only loved you as best I could, but you alone. He finally passed out. Maybe his phone had just gone dead, and Nancy put the receiver away with relief. Loved me, didn't love me. What did it matter now? There was nothing left. No more love, no more home to return to, nothing but nightmares. But since then, and settled in her heart, this fierce hatred of rich people who did not know the humiliation that fell to her share. If only I had money then, lots of money, she often thought. I wouldn't have had to go to Thailand. There would have been no striptease and no nightmarish return to my hometown where no one wanted me. And how dare Mason treat me like that? Yeah, he was an asshole. That's true. But if I was a rich chick, I wouldn't even know it. We'd be married, and he'd carry me around in his arms like he carries his Lisa now. Wouldn't it be nice to go back there in a different way? A rich girl who's throwing her money around left and right. Then he'd come to me on his knees and beg me to forgive him. Michael, it's impossible to work anymore. Betty complained. Her husband looked up from his papers. Betty in the theater always respected the subordination and never broke into the office of her husband, bypassing the secretary. And the fact that she called him simply by his first name already told him that the wife could barely contain herself. What is it, Betty? He asked sympathetically. Sit down, maybe some coffee. Would you like some? Listen, Michael, she said in a voice ringing with anger. I took this young lady into the company at her request, as agreed in the course de ballet, but she is late for an hour for every rehearsal. She's rude to the choreographers, behaves like a lady. I'm not even talking about her data. She moves in a clumsy way. Okay, that can be fixed, but you have to work for it. You've got to work, Michael, not chill out. Anyway, Betty finally sat down in the chair she was offered. I don't know what to do with her. She's mean to the girls. She's had 2 fights in the locker room, tardiness, but I've already talked about that. The other day before yesterday, I was walking down the stairs and the cleaning lady was mopping the floors. And what did Nancy do? She kicked the bucket and went on her way, happy. A whole bucket of dirty water, Michael. What do you suggest? Fire her? Betty shrugged her shoulders. I don't know. Fire her. Charles might take offense. Leave things the way they are. Well, no, you can't do that either. I've just been exhausted for 2 months. We've got an opening night coming up, and it takes half my energy to get Nancy to behave. I'm just so tired. And then you know as well as I do, if you have someone like that on the team, they all talk. One lousy sheep spoils the whole flock. Michael listened to his wife, nodding in time with her words. All right, he said conciliatingly. Let me try to talk to her myself. Maybe she'll hear me at least. What do you say? But I wouldn't count on much if I were you. Betty got up and went to the door. Send her to me, Michael asked. Okay. Nancy showed up a couple minutes later, swaying her hips in the office, making Michael immediately hot. What kind of girl is that? Everyone goes to rehearsals dressed plainly, but look at this one. Scarlet t-shirt so stretched on the chest that not even an hour will crack, and these pants are hers. Everything you can and can't do is in plain sight. Bullying, kitten? Michael smiled and came closer to hug her. The girl didn't like the idea. Your house mouse told me you wanted to see me, she said, sitting down in the chair. Betty. Michael corrected her. All right. The girl agreed. She threw off her shoes and put her feet up on the table. Your room mouse, Betty, said you wanted to see me. And what was that for? Michael covered the girl's bare feet with the palm of his hand. You can't be so careless, Nancy. He said, what if someone hears you? Let them hear, she purred. We've been together 2 months now, Michael, and it's time we stopped hiding in corners, especially if everyone around us has figured it out for a long time. It's not time yet. We've already done it with you. And more. She pouted her already puffy lips capriciously. She's always bossing everybody around. I understand. She's your ballet master, an important bird, all that. But I'm not a pig's tail either. I'm your favorite woman. Isn't that so? Isn't she or isn't she? Yes, darling, I am. But he stroked her leg. How do I explain this to her? Aren't you ready for a divorce? She asked. No. Michael admitted it, and it's not about you or her. It's just that I've put so much into this theater, and in a divorce, Betty and I have to share it. Betty, Nancy snorted. What tenderness. He hastened to correct his mistake. With Betty. But it doesn't matter, kitten, what you call her. What matters is that I mean, and you may be left without a theater. That's something to think about, and don't think it won't affect our income. The girl yawned defiantly. Honestly, I'd rather stay with Charles. He may be an undertaker, but he's a free man, with no wives or other pets. Nancy, Michael said reproachfully, but it was as if she hadn't heard him. What's there to catch? Your fool always walks around with her lips puckered, and you only spank me for nothing. You're afraid to get a divorce. So what's the point of me hanging around here? And in a course de ballet. No, Michael, I think I'm gonna get out of here. There's no prospects here, only nerves. She stood up, stretched cat-like and flexible. Don't call me Nancy. Michael grabbed her arm, desperation in his eyes. Nancy, wait, let's talk. What do you want? Don't go, kitten. Don't leave me. I agree. I'm a fool for creating this situation. I don't know how to get out of it, but give me time, I'll figure it out. Please, Nancy, never before had he felt so helpless and pathetic. Never before have he had to beg for anyone for anything. I'll sort it out, Nancy. You just wait, just a little longer, just a little while longer, and then you and I will be together. She looked at him, not hiding a contemptuous smile. Michael saw it, understood it, and did not care. Let her despise him. Let her not consider him a human being at all. I don't care, but let her stay close to him. Her look, her warm skin, those soft lips, all this became for him a drug, without which life lost all meaning. I've never loved anyone as much as you, he confessed. Various things happened to me. Everything was, both bad and good. But to go so crazy about a woman? Never. I cannot without you. I'll think that you left me, and then why should I live? Fool, she said almost fondly. What will change in a week? A month, even a year from now? You will still shake with fear for this theater, from his wife encrypted without end. I don't want to be like that. I'll think of something. Michael said again, you just wait a little longer. As Nancy was leaving the office, she almost ran into Betty. Was Michael free yet? The dancer shook her head tiredly. No, and I'll be damned if he'll be free of you. Although, personally, I wouldn't mind at all. Betty was taken aback. You, Nancy, are you showing up to work drunk now, too? I'm going to talk to Michael right now. Talk to whoever you want. Talk to your brains, if you've got any, of course. I've had it. Nancy bellowed. If you're so blind and you can't see that Michael loves me, and you're already there for him. She walked past, hitting her rival hard with her shoulder. I'll never set foot in your theater again. She shouted goodbye. You can dance around without me, and I'll be there for you. Betty remained standing in front of the door of her husband's office. No, it was a lie and hypocrisy to say that she did not notice anything. She was quite aware of Michael's reasons for even taking a shower with his phone. And these sudden absences from the house, supposedly to get an hour's air, and lingering well into the night. She guessed, of course, but she preferred not to dwell on those suspicions. After all, thinking and knowing were not the same thing. The only thing she couldn't assume was that her husband was having an affair at work, somewhere on the side, yes, perhaps, but to be so blatant, right in front of her nose. Betty slowly turned around and, without looking in Michael's office, wandered toward the exit. As always, in moments of serious upheaval, she wanted only one thing, to be home as soon as possible. Michael, hearing her footsteps, sighed with relief. He sat at his desk, looking at the message from his mistress. I've worked out a way for us to arrange things. Meet me in half an hour near the drugstore across from the theater. I'm waiting. Don't be late. Betty was not at all anxious for her husband to return from work. In fact, she hoped he'd be late again. She'd never been good at and didn't like confrontation. Come to think of it, had she ever had occasion to do so? No, she hadn't. And now there is. What should she say to her husband? Darling, do I know you're having an affair with someone else? And if he denies it, that's easy. Or another option, even more idiotic. Michael, do you have a mistress? Yes, I do. Is it Nancy? Yes, it is. What to say next was a complete mystery. Or else. Her thoughts were interrupted by the phone ringing. Betty picked up the receiver. Yes? Hello, mouseful. Nancy's voice on the other end of the line was surprisingly cheerful. Did it get through to you? Dumbass that he doesn't care about you? And he won't care as long as he has a woman like me by his side. You're not with him. Betty snapped at him, but Nancy only laughed even louder. Not yet, but soon. Well, I've had enough of you, C.O. loser. And Nancy hung up. Betty suddenly laughed to herself. Everything that was happening, this Nancy talk, her unbridled rudeness, it was all so absurd that it made her laugh involuntarily. And Betty laughed for a long time, at the top of her voice, until suddenly tears sprang from her eyes. Michael, fortunately, had not yet arrived, and Betty had no need to lock herself in the bathroom to cry in peace. Her life with her husband couldn't be called happy, but she wasn't miserable either. Michael had been primed for success ever since he was a child. An excellent student and the only gold medalist in their graduating class, sports dancing, athletics. He always read a lot. And in high school, the first went to preparatory courses and did it not by choice and insistence of parents and himself. And that's why Betty always liked not him, the perfect schoolboy and the embodied dream of his parents and teachers, but the cheerful Charles. They had been friends since they were very young. Michael, Charles, and Betty. Michael often joked that he remembered his wife even earlier than he remembered himself. Michael was the most serious of the trio, Charles the boldest, and Betty the centerpiece. They were never bored together. And what is surprising, their close circle, all three of them, carefully guarded from outsiders. For many years, in fact, since kindergarten and preschool graduation, no one had managed to join their company. And then the final bell rang, and Charles left. Betty experienced his departure as a real tragedy. She'd never told anyone she'd been in love with Charles since 8th grade, not even her mom. And after graduation, he has shocked her by announcing that he was leaving, probably for good. Michael, for some reason, was not very surprised by this. They must have already discussed it without her. Betty decided that she would definitely come to the train to see Charles off and at least open up to him when saying goodbye. She had gotten up terribly early that morning, and that was all just so she could get her hair done, choose a suitable dress, and have time to do her makeup. She really wanted Charles to remember her beautiful, very, very beautiful. Michael had promised to pick her up at 9:30 in the morning, but he called at 8. "Did you sleep it off?" he asked cheerfully. "Well, don't cry. Charles is not angry. He said to say hello to you." "What hello?" Betty was confused. "You said he had a train at 9 o'clock. I'm all packed. I'm just waiting for you." "Oh, Mother, you've heard the wrong thing. I told you several times that Charles decided to take the night train." Michael laughed into the phone. "No, Betty, you've really got it all wrong." "How did I get it wrong, Michael?" "I had it written down." She argued, realizing that it didn't matter now. Charles had left anyway. "You know what? Go to bed." Michael suggested it. "With all these exams, you've gone completely out of your mind. You should get some rest, Betty. You'll sleep. You'll be fine. Do you want me to pick you up tonight and take a walk?" "Yeah, we'll go for a walk." Betty hung up the phone and looked at her reflection in the mirror. How pathetic it had seemed to her, the hair, the dress, the slightly tinted lips. Now it all seemed like a rejected gift, the kind of gift that had been long and carefully chosen, carefully wrapped, and when it came time to present it, it had been glanced at and sent to the pile of cards and silly souvenirs. Charles was gone, and we could wash our faces and straighten our curls. Betty lay on the bed and cried into her pillow. At the same time, Michael brushed his hair and left the house. It was 8:40, and he would still have time to get to the train station and see his friend off. Michael did not stay anywhere that evening. He entered the apartment and from the threshold shouted cheerfully, "Betty, I'm home. Where are you?" She was about to answer that she was in the kitchen, but changed her mind. He'd behear himself. "Betty, are you asleep? What's the matter with you?" He looked into the bedroom and, not finding his wife there, grumbled something resentfully to the tray. Finally, it was the kitchen. "Ah, there you are hiding." Michael rejoiced. "Why don't you answer? I've been looking all over the house for you. Look, a surprise." He pulled out a box of chocolates tied with a huge bow from behind his back with a deft gesture of a magician. "Your favorite." I know. You can't have sweets. You have to keep in shape. And that's the right thing to do, by the way. But they caught my eye, and I couldn't resist." Betty thanked him for the gift with a nod. "Shall we have tea?" Michael put the cup in front of his wife and untied the bow on the box himself. "Get to it. Once every couple of months you can forget about the figurine, can't you? Come on, a couple of candies won't hurt. Your mistress called today." Without raising her eyes from the table, Betty reported. Her husband hummed, pouring tea. "Wow! Which one?" "I've had 8 or 12 of them in the last week. I don't remember exactly." "Stop clowning around," she said. "Please, Nancy." Betty took the candy and bit into it absent-mindedly. It was too much to go on with the conversation about everything she'd had to hear from the cheeky girl today. "Nancy?" Michael said in astonishment. "Wait, you mean you think I'm having an affair with Nancy?" "With her?" He leaned back in his chair and laughed loudly. "But honest to goodness, Betty." He squeezed out between fits of laughter. "If you're going to think of such a thing, why Nancy? I'd have expected more imagination from you." "Because," replied the wife in a steady voice, she spoke to me today," and Betty waved her hand in the air. "Michael, my eyes are blurring. Help me, I can't get to the bed by myself." Her husband ran over to her and helped her up. "Come on, Betty, come on." "Burr?" "It's dark." Betty woke up to the cold. "Michael, would you turn up the heat and get me a blanket? It's freezing." No one answered her, and that was a shame. "Jesus." Betty grumbled unhappily. "Why is it that when you have to, there's no one? And when you don't, it's everyone." She opened her eyes, threw back the sheet, and sat up. "What?" Betty didn't recognize her bedroom. White-tiled walls, white-tiled floor, she was sitting on a hospital gurney, and there was another one next to it. The person lying on it was covered head to toe with a sheet. Even his face was covered. "It was a nightmare," she muttered. "This is a dream, isn't it?" "Just a dream." "What kind of game?" Her quiet voice sounded deafening in the silence. It seemed to bounce off the walls and resonate. "What is it, Michael?" "Michael? Oh my God, what is this? Am I in the morgue or something?" Betty jumped off the gurney, hit the neighboring one, and only now I understood everything. And having understood, I pressed my palm to my mouth, not to scream with horror. A human hand, with blue, dead skin, fell out from under the sheet. Betty rushed to the locked door and pounded on it with her fists. "Open up, whoever's in there, do you hear me? Open up, damn it, I'm alive. Open up right now. Anybody there?" There were hurried footsteps at the door, and the door swung open. A scared young guard stared at Betty with widened eyes. "What are you doing here? How did you get in here?" "We'll find out." She tossed it past him like a hurricane. "Call your superiors, come on." "Call them right now. And shut this morgue down, for God's sake." Betty looked around. She'd seen this somewhere before. "Well, familiar interiors. Charles, is the owner here? Is he? Well, call him right now and tell him Betty's locked in the fridge. What? What, Betty? You tell him and he'll figure it out. Call him. The kid, who hadn't come to his senses yet, flapped his eyes and poked his finger at the numbers on the screen. At last the long calls rang out, and Betty stopped darting from corner to corner. What a showcase, she said, at the several coffins displayed along the walls of the roof. Jolly good business your boss has, boy, said. On his way, mumbled the guard. What were you doing, sleeping? Betty asked angrily. Have you seen anyone here? No one. He wrinkled his forehead funny. I would have noticed, but the morgue has a back door, so they bring them in from there. I see, she sighed. Do you have any tea? I was lying in a morgue, not on a beach. Charles arrived half an hour later, and at the sight of Betty, froze in place. She was still frozen, pale and rubbing her palms together furiously. You know, he said confusedly, I had hoped until the last moment that this was all some kind of stupid prank. I wish I'd thought so. Charles, what's going on? I'm so lost, I don't understand anything. Charles came over to her, rolled her up in his jacket, hugged her tightly around the shoulders. Let's go to my office, Betty. You'll get warm, we'll have coffee. I don't understand anything yet. What about you? You don't remember anything at all. How did you get here? Well, I was at home, then Michael came over, we had tea and talked. And then, Charles. She stared at her friend in shock. Charles, I think I figured it out. Michael brought a box of chocolates. We had tea with candy, Charles. So, he didn't get it. What's that got to do with it? I ate a candy, just one, and I got dizzy. Even my eyes got blurry somehow. I asked Michael to help me to the bed. There was something in the candy in it. You know now? Well, all right. Let's say, Charles nodded. So you got dizzy and went to lie down. Then how did you get here? Betty covered her face helplessly with her hands. I don't know anything at all, Charles. Maybe I'm just crazy already. He stroked her head. Betty, I've thought of something. I'm going over to your house right now. Don't. There, maybe there. You have to. With a little pressure, he said. I have to. Tell me, who else might I meet there? Betty lost her brow. Well, this one, Nancy, I didn't want to tell you. Anyway, Michael and Nancy. Right. Don't go on. Charles interrupted. I got the gist of it. Betty shook her head. How ridiculous, how unconscionable. She looked up at Charles tiredly and smiled. Why did you have to leave on the night train? Would things have turned out differently if I had come to see you off? The night train? He asked in surprise. I took the morning train, and I was very upset that you didn't come to say goodbye. Michael told me you had the flu, and you're lying there with a fever. Michael told you. What flu? What fever? I got up bright and early. I was doing my make-ups of that. So that you remember me like this? Beautiful. And then Michael called, even grumbled that I didn't see you off, didn't show up for the train. He also said I'd got it all wrong, what you told me about the night. So he just didn't want us to meet. Is that it? But why, Charles? It was always the three of us together. And Charles suddenly remembered the last summer they'd spent together, when Betty's parents had taken her to the sea, and he and Michael, 17-year-old boys, had gone to Charles's grandmother's cottage. There they had enough of everything, and the endless sky above their heads, and the green forest, and there were water bodies all around. You could fish or swim. The friends, having quickly managed to manage the household, burned a fire on the shore, roasted caught fish on it, and bathed in the lake without end. I bet I can swim across, Charles boasted. 15-round trip? Or shall we race against each other? Sit down already." Michael laughed. He ate too much and decided to go in the water. "Are you suicidal?" "Come on, Michael, just admit you're weak." Charles, as always, was a gambler, and Michael, knowing this, was genuinely amused, looking at his friend. "I'm weak." He didn't deny it. "I've got a good head, don't you?" Charles snorted indignantly. "Time me." He ran into the water, making a fountain of spray. Michael looked seriously at his watch and then at his friend's head, which was already in the middle of the lake. "Swim back," he shouted with sudden alarm. He could not explain why he was suddenly so afraid. Charles could swim as well as a dolphin, and how many times they had swum across the lake together and alone could not be counted. But Michael suddenly became cold, as if frost had fallen on him in the middle of a summer night. "Charles!" No one answered him. "Get back!" shouted Michael, already frightened. "Swim back, Charles!" He was already rushing toward the water, still shouting and calling for his friend. He realized that it was useless, but he had to be in time. He swam, and it seemed to him that the lake water, familiar from his childhood, had become as viscous as honey. It was difficult to break through it, and his shoulders were already inhumanly aching from the strain. "Hold on," Michael whispered. He swam toward the middle of the lake where he had last seen Charles. "Hold on." He gathered more air into his chest and dived in. Almost immediately something silky came under his arm. He clutched the hair tightly in his fist and jerked it to the surface. Charles let out a loud convulsive breath. "Ashole," Michael hissed, almost drowned for crying out loud. He swam, supporting his friend, then dragged him out onto the sand. And all the while, every time, every second, he wanted desperately to punch Charles in the insolent face. Only the face was pale and so frightened that he couldn't get his hand on it. "Cramp?" he asked. Charles smiled smugly, and his eyes twinkled with laughter. "No. A mermaid dragged her to the bottom. You should have seen what she had." He gestured to the parts of the mermaid's body that impressed him especially. Here Michael could not stand it, and the friends laughed so loudly that they scared away a bird in the bushes. "Thank you, friend," said Charles, laughing. "You saved my life, and now I am in your debt." Michael patted him silently on the shoulder. They returned to this conversation almost a year later, just before graduation. "Remember, I'll continue?" Michael asked, as if by the way. "But that time at the lake?" Charles looked at him questioningly. "I remember. You can forget that." "Then?" Michael continued. "Give in to Betty? I know you have a soft spot for her, but I'm not playing around. I want to marry her." Charles put his head down. "You have a soft spot." Michael, being the considerate guy he is, "I didn't mean it. I know you love her." "Love her? What can you do against first love?" He both wanted to tell Betty and was afraid to. But how she'd ridicule him and send him away with all his tender feelings. Could it be like that? Surely it could, but still, in the back of his mind, Charles cherished the hope that one day they could talk frankly, and maybe even Betty could reciprocate. And now Michael had taken that hope away from him, and he hadn't, really. He just knew his friend owed him a favor. So he demanded repayment. The thought flashed through his mind, was it a friend? Charles knew for a fact that if he had saved Michael, he would never have reminded him of that. The thought was too frightening, and Charles hurried to push it away. Duty is duty, isn't it? In a low voice, Michael reminded him. Charles turned away. "I'll be gone after graduation," he promised briefly. Betty stood up. "Shall we go to my place together?" she said. I had new questions for my husband. He was mean to me the other day. He knew everything and he did it. How is that fair? And I was waiting to hear from you, and then Michael told me you had a girlfriend here. What a torrid affair. By the bewilderment on Charles's face, she guessed it was another one of her husband's tricks. And then, she finished sadly. I decided that it was a train wreck, so I agreed to go out with Michael. Then I married him. Charles sighed and took Betty's hand in his. I'm sorry, he said, running his fingers over hers. I'm sorry. It's my fault for bringing Nancy to you. If it hadn't been for that, stop it. Betty waved him away. But it wouldn't have been Nancy. It would have been someone else. Who knows who? Your Nancy only brought out what was hidden. Like litmus paper, like they used to show us in chemistry at school. You dip it in a reagent, it changes color. That's Nancy. She's the reactant, and Michael's the paper. Well, are we sitting down? Let's go. No, Charles told her firmly. If we want to find out what happened to you, I have to go alone. In the meantime, you wait here for me, okay? There's tea, coffee, some cookies. You want to put on a movie and wait for me. I'll be back soon, but in the meantime, there's something you need to remember. I think they wanted to get rid of you, to kill you. Isn't that strange to you? Me? I'm not. If you and Michael had just gotten divorced, you'd be entitled to half of everything you'd made. And someone didn't like that. Someone who wanted it all. Nancy? Michael wouldn't. Maybe she would. But to get to the bottom of this, we need them to come forward. And that's why we're going to go like this. Look, Nancy stretched out across the marital bed and smiled sweetly, Michael. Isn't this a great idea? In a couple hours, your bitch will wake up. You'll take her home, and she'll tell everyone she woke up in the morgue. That's a full-blown delusion. And then you're in the psych ward, insanity plea, guardianship. And then you're free. And most importantly, the theater will belong to you alone. And Betty? He asked hoarsely. What will happen to her? Michael did not share his mistress's enthusiasm. On the contrary, with each passing minute he felt more and more acutely that something terrible had happened, and the worst of it was not without his active participation. How did he dare to do such a thing? Disability pension. Nancy laughed. What's the matter with her? We'll find her some cozy boarding house, with a forest nearby with a river, and we'll see to it that she's properly looked after. About 50 years she will easily live, only in peace and quiet. It's a dream of many. If you want to know, maybe some amateur club will organize there. See how good it is that I made a copy of the key to the Charles of the afterlife in time. But don't you think I'm adorable? She held out her arms to him. Well, come to me. Michael grinned crookedly, but did not take a step toward the girl. For some reason he felt creepy. Today Nancy had interfered with his wife, and tomorrow, to take possession of the theater, she would quickly think of a way to get rid of him. She'll think of a way to get rid of him, you can be sure of it. Suddenly he remembered how, about a couple of weeks after Nancy's arrival at the theater, his wife had complained to him that their company was going through a bad patch. I don't know what that's all about. One of the leading dancers was hit by a car not far from the theater. Now the girl was lying with fractures on the stretching. And there's absolutely no one to replace her, because half of the Corps de Ballet girls have some strange allergies. Girls with red spots all over their bodies, lined up at the dermatologist. Could be something in the concert clothes? In the fabric, said the doctor. The girls rewashed their costumes with hypoallergenic powder, but a day later their strange ailment returned. They're scratching themselves until they bleed. Betty was almost hysterical. The concert dresses are all revealing. How could they let girls like that on stage and no one for the lead? But maybe Nancy will give you a chance to prove yourself. He suggested it. After all, she's the only one who doesn't itch yet, and her legs are intact. Try it. If she's on an emotional high, she'll do something great. Betty, of course, sighed and wailed, but finally agreed. However, Nancy showed nothing but laziness. After the performance, Betty returned her to the Corps de Ballet. Michael was terribly upset about it, especially because Nancy had been angry for 2 weeks and barely spoke to him. Why was he bringing it up now? Were you the one who went off on the girl the other day? He asked in a whisper. Nancy squinted at him. At Vanessa, I thought you'd be quicker on the uptake. What was there to do? Do you think your inadequate wife would have given me the lead? But you could have. He was interrupted by the doorbell. It was Charles. Charles, what are you doing here? Michael, not now. He held up his hand warningly. I went to pick up some papers today, and the orderly said there was an unknown woman frozen in the morgue. I went to look and recognized Betty. What? Michael shouted wildly. Charles, are you lying? I mean, she's. You're lying. I'm not lying. Sadly, Charles replied. She died of hypothermia. I don't know what to say, Michael. Nancy stood stone-faced on the threshold of the bedroom. Michael. She called softly, but he, his face twisted with savage rage, lunged at her. Nancy squealed. Charles pounced behind her, pulling his friend away from the girl. It was all her. Michael howled. She made the whole thing up. I didn't mean to. I didn't mean to kill her. Yeah, what are you talking about? Charles shouted at both of them. What have you done? She told me it wasn't dangerous. She said. Charles looked at Nancy. What did you do? Was this all your idea? The girl shrugged her shoulder. Why the hell should I live like a beggar? Because that coward is afraid to divorce his gray mouse. What are you looking at? Yeah, it was my idea. I convinced that slug that his woman wouldn't freeze to death. Would he have agreed if he'd known? Michael's awake. What's going to happen now? To all of us, to me. Charles, I didn't mean to. But don't you believe me? Charles, I didn't mean it. Of course you didn't. Nancy grinned contemptuously. He didn't want to. He wanted the theater, Betty at home and me at night. Didn't he? Charles involuntarily stepped back from the girl. She was so repulsive to him that he was afraid she would touch him with the edge of her dress. Charles collapsed on his knees. Michael. Don't ruin it. What do we do now, Charles? What do we do? Shut up. Charles, stop whining. It doesn't help. Let's all go to the morgue, take the body and dump it in the river before dawn. There's no telling what could have happened. She went for a swim and her leg cramped up. Will they believe that? Michael moaned. He sat on the floor with his fingers in his hair. No, you can't do that. Who would believe it? There's no other way out anyway. Charles cut him off. And in a couple of days, you'll have to report your wife missing before they find her. Get up, Michael, get up. Let's go. And you. He looked at the girl. You too. Me? Yeah, and you. Jump to his feet, Michael. You made the whole thing up. And now you want to get out of it. No way. Get in the car, now. Charles lost his patience. They drove for a long time in silence, broken only by Michael's sobs. He was scared. Only now he realized how right Charles had been when he had warned him not to get involved with Nancy. It would be worth it. That's what he'd said then. He hadn't listened to him. He thought Charles had been jealous, but it turned out that Nancy was a monster who had completely subjugated him and made him a murderer. I hate you." He exhaled. "You scum, you bastard. I hate you. You only think you do." The girl smiled. She had regained her usual composure and will cease to seem as soon as you realize how many problems I have saved you. No need to fray nerves in court, divorce, divide the property. "Shut up," screamed Michael. "Shut up? You're a murderer." "Both of you shut up," said Charles from his seat. "Both of you." The funeral home was bright. "The morgue is down the hall to the right," said Charles. "Is she in there?" Michael asked in a trembling voice. "In the morgue?" No. The door to Charles' office swung open and Betty stepped in. "Good night, you bastards." "Did everything work out, Charles?" "Of course it did." He took the tape recorder out of his pocket. "It's all here. I think it's enough to send them to a place not so far away." "No," Michael whispered, backing up against the wall. "No, no, no." He shook and fell to his knees, crossing himself, muttering as if he were casting a spell. "No, no, no. Without me." Suddenly Nancy laughed and rushed across the hall to the door. "She'll run away." Betty gasped. Charles shook his head. "Don't worry about it. The police are waiting for him, and this one." He nodded disgustedly at Michael, who had given up crossing and mumbling and was now just quietly swaying from side to side. "This one won't need to be detained. Come in and get him." "What's going to happen now?" Betty said softly as Michael, sobbing and mumbling again, was led out of the bureau. "What's going to happen now, Charles?" He put his arm around her, stroked her shoulder. "You need to get some sleep now. That's the first thing." "I'm not going home." Betty shivered. "I don't want to go there ever again." "It's not my home anymore." "Then let's go to my place," said Charles. "Take a bath, get some sleep, and then we'll figure out how to live our lives. And you?" "I'll sleep on the sofa, like in better times." Charles winked at her, and then they drove through the crazy city night. And Charles deliberately took his time because they had so much to talk about. And Betty suddenly felt really happy for the first time in years because there was a road to drive on, and Charles was there, so safe and easy to be with, and at the end of the night she had a bath and a chance to sleep. Is it too much to be happy?
Subscribe and click the bell.
Tbilisi, the capital of Georgia, is rightly considered the tourist pearl of this country. Every year it attracts more and more tourists. Located on the banks of the Kura River, this city has a special charm that has attracted the hearts of people from all over the world. Here and the family of the famous businessman Stephen Otis went on a joint trip to the capital of Georgia. Staying in a beautiful hotel near the mountains, the Otis family has always been an example of prosperity and harmony. Stephen was happily married to his first university and loved Adriana for over 20 years. The businessman's wife was a talented artist and was busy raising 3 children. The eldest was 18-year-old Nancy, the middle was 16-year-old Christopher, and the youngest was Princess Molly, who was barely 6 years old. Stephen and Adriana were not only loving parents, but also loyal friends to their children. They spent a lot of time together, traveling, visiting museums and theaters. There was an atmosphere of love, respect, and support in the Otis home. Every evening, the family gathered in their large 2-story apartment. Around the big table, they shared all the news and plans for the future. The spouses taught their children to appreciate labor, to be responsible and kind. Nancy, Christopher, and Molly grew up confident and ready for adulthood. The Otis family was happy and grateful to fate for giving them such wonderful children and a faithful friend in the form of a husband. They knew that together they could overcome any difficulties and achieve any goals. In one of the family evenings in the Otis dining room, they decided how to spend their vacation and where to go to languish in Moscow all summer. Nobody had a desire to go. They thought for a long time, and each of the adult members of the family offered different options. Nancy wanted to fly to Dubai, Christopher to Israel. Parents wanted to go somewhere closer to Abkhazia, Georgia, or Dagestan. Ma started to object. Adriana. Christopher, but what Dagestan? There's practically nothing to do there. What's interesting there? Fortresses, mosques, nature. The woman listed. Sightseeing is not enough for you. That's not interesting. I liked my dad's suggestion to go to Georgia. I supported my parents' wish. Nancy, there's a lot to see there. How do you know? Asked my sister Christopher. You're not gonna believe what I Googled. Showed her brother her phone with the results of Georgia's query. See what? You didn't even think to monitor all the suggestions. I'm gonna look too. Pull out your phone and make the necessary inquiries, said Christopher. And I'll tell you if I'm in for Georgia. You have 5 minutes to vote, said Stephen, and started the stopwatch on his wristwatch. Let's go, Tanishka, and I will clear the table in the meantime. 5 minutes later, the older children decided to agree to the trip to Georgia. It remained only to think over the route, where to fly to, and what cities to visit. In the end, Otis decided to fly to Tbilisi to devote 2 weeks of their trip to visit all the most cozy corners of the original and interesting city. They rent a car and set off on the Tel Aviv route. Signal Kakheti, ancient cave town of Pluls. Scheme. When the Otis family prepared the necessary documents, settled all the things in the business, booked tickets, and collected the necessary things for travel and rest, little Molly did not forget to bring along her favorite toys. Their flight was due in the early morning, so they woke up before dark and headed to the airport. Upon arrival, they went through check-in and security check, after which they went to board the plane. When they boarded the plane, they were greeted by friendly flight attendants who helped them find their seats and explained the safety rules. Soon the plane took off, and the Otis began their journey in the sky. During the flight, some slept, some looked out the window, and some watched movies and played games. But all Christopher, Molly, and Stephen with Adriana were enjoying the food that the stewards were offering. Little Molly enjoyed watching the clouds and marveling at the beauty of the earth from a bird's eye view, actively commenting to her daddy. What does she see? So, has the Stephen family spoken? We are back on solid ground and more exciting adventures await in the future. Hooray! The rest of the family shouted with glee as they passed the beginning of their journey with cheers of joy. From the airport, Otis went straight to the hotel, where they rented 4 rooms for 2 weeks and every day made trips to the city for excursions. The whole family noted that in Tbilisi modernity harmoniously combines with historical heritage, creating a unique atmosphere. Tourists enjoyed visiting ancient fortresses, temples, and monasteries, which reminded of the past of Georgia, and with no less pleasure viewed modern skyscrapers, shopping centers, and entertainment complexes, which made life in the capital of Georgia convenient and comfortable. Walking along the streets of Tbilisi, Nancy photographed the bright and colorful facades of houses decorated with folk ornaments and stucco. Stephen and Adriana appreciated the old town, where the famous northern baths, built in the 17th century and still popular with locals and visitors, are located. Christopher and Molly were most impressed by the Kura River embankment, where they were able to enjoy the beautiful views of the river and the city, and most importantly, to try Georgian cuisine in one of the many restaurants located on the embankment. When the city sights were over, the Otis family decided to go to the mountains to get a bird's eye view of Tbilisi. Nancy, who didn't want to go for fear of ruining her manicure and tearing things, had to be persuaded the longest. But Mama went back to begging Nancy, "Can't you spend your leisure time in a civilized way?" "What do you call civilized?" Adriana asked her daughter to sit in the room or sleep on the phone, to go down to the table only. "You're exaggerating again, Mom," sighed Camille. "Civilized. It's city tours, museums, a motorboat on the river, Camille, in the mountains. Well, that sort of thing. You're grown-ups. You need it. And you're an adult too," the woman reminded me. "Soon to be 19. And you're acting like a spoiled teenager. You don't want to come with us, that's fine. But you can't go alone in a foreign country. You're gonna sit in your room and wait for us. And it's clear you've planned a bed for the whole day, but we'll come back. And then we'll go for a walk along the night quay until the evening alone, without jumping out of bed. Nancy began to gather. I'd better go with you. I don't want to puff myself up all by myself, but I'll have to redo my manicure. You will, Adriana smiled. Daddy paid for the course and bought you everything you need for a reason. Get dressed quickly. You have 15 minutes to get ready. I'll meet you downstairs. An hour later, the Otis family was on their way to the bottom of the mountain. Motorcycle, which is part of the Sagittarius Ridge. There they were met by a guide who would take them to the top of the mountain to the highest point of Tbilisi and tell them about the sights. A powerful path led the tourists to the elevator that would take them to the top. The tour guide was pouring out facts and interesting stories like from a cornucopia. Let me remind you that this is the highest point of Tbilisi. The guide told us, as much as 740 meters above sea level. Excuse me, Nancy interrupted him. Why does it have that name? Does it translate somehow, I suppose? Yes, of course it does. The name of the mountain translates from Georgian as the Holy Mountain. Holy Mountain is Christopher. Yes, literally Holy Mountain. According to legend, the ascetic street David settled here in the 6th century. And in the 19th century, a stone church was built on the site of his prayer room. The guide continued the story. Around the church since 1929, there is a pantheon with numerous burial places of prominent people of Georgia, famous writers, artists, scientists, and national heroes. I understand, Stephen inserted a remark into the guide's monologue. The TV tower is at the very top. We will go to it, or go straight to the Turtle to Hymn Lake. The TV tower height of 275 meters was built in 1955 on the very top of the mountain. It can be seen from almost every corner of the city, and it is one of the symbols of Tbilisi. Excursion guide, stopping near the platform for cars. The funicular continued. There is also a park where we can go out and a restaurant. One of the walls of the restaurant is decorated with monumental frescoes and paintings dedicated to Pirosmani. We will climb up there as well and go to the lake. A leisurely ascent among beautiful nature took about 10 minutes. During it, Otis listened attentively to the guide, looked around with interest, and took lots of photos to save their memories in a photo album. Climbing to the top, they answered donuts in the cafe. Cable car enjoyed the view of the city and walked around the park. After an hour, they headed to the other side of the mountain to reach the Turtles' Lake. That's how they spent an unforgettable 2-week vacation in Tbilisi as a family. But Parabola is going on a car tour through the ancient cities of Georgia to admire the nature and architecture of small towns and continue their acquaintance with this amazing country. Between Tel Aviv and Signal, the Otis family saw advertisements for several hiking trails through the mountains. They decided to stop and take part in one of the climbs, choosing a mountain that was not too high. After all, little Molly was completely unprepared. After making their way to one group, led by an experienced guide, they set off on a little hike through the mountain peaks in the expanse of Georgia, following a route that took them over cliff faces and glades with their warrior trees. Parents feared for their children's lives. And as, apparently, not for nothing, Nancy liked to take crazy pictures. She got too close to the edge of the cliff and plummeted down so fast that no one had time to react. Nancy. All the family members screamed in unison. Stephen, saving her rather than with her. Stephen, sobbing, rushed to the edge of the cliff. Adriana, stop. Stephen grabbed his wife tightly. Stop. Don't you dare look over there. A real panic and commotion ensued. Tourists gathered around. Unsuccessful mothers were screaming and wringing their hands. The younger children didn't know what to do. Frightened little Molly was sobbing uncontrollably. Approaching cautiously to the edge of the cliff with several men who had called together to help, the head of the family felt an attack of bad luck, But then, to his incredible relief, he saw that his daughter had by some miracle managed to cling to a sturdy-looking bush that was growing out of a crevice in the cliff. If it wasn't for this horrifying accident now grabbing everyone's attention, one could admire the view from here. It was simply breathtaking. A valley spread out below, covered in a green carpet of grasses and bright patches of flowers. The air was clear and incredibly fresh, filled with the scent of mountain plants. The sky seemed to glow from within with a bright porcelain blue color without a single cloud of sunlight illuminating the valley, making it even more beautiful. The wind lightly moved the grass, creating waves on the sea of green. And not far from the cliff, sheep were grazing on a small plateau area. "Honey, don't move," Stephen shouted. "We're going to get you out of there." "Somebody help me. What are you standing there for? We have to do something. We've already called the rescue team." Another tourist tried to calm the man down. "Yeah, by the time they get here, my daughter could be down. But we can't get her out of there by ourselves," the guide said. "No one has a rope." "The sobs are yours," Adriana asked. "Maybe we could toss it to my girl so she can untie it, and we'll pick her up." "No," answered all the participants in the event in turn. All the while the other campers, the tour guide and Adriana, and the kids were trying to figure out how to save Nancy. Until the rescuers arrived, Stephen was thrashing around looking for real help and trying to talk to his daughter, who was sobbing with fear and afraid to move, while everyone was thrashing around looking for a solution. A young lad nearby sheep herded the sheep, seeing what a difficult situation the girl was in, decided to help. The pasture was covered with lush green grass, which softly sowed bodies under the feet of the guy, who moved towards the rock on which the accident occurred. The sheep were all the while grazing peacefully in the meadow, their white wool glistening in the sunshine. The shepherd was able to climb a ledge low off the ground so that he could reach Nancy with a rope. He succeeded, but the girl was so frightened that she did not know what to do with the rope, especially since she didn't have enough space. The tourist guide and the girl's parents watched the young man from above, who began to climb up the practically allotted rock Helena. The ascent was difficult and dangerous. The rock was so steep and slippery that the young man's boots could barely hold on for longer than 2 seconds on small exposures. But he kept climbing, clinging to ledges and cracks in the rock. His hands and feet trembled with exertion, but he did not give up. At last, after much effort, the lad managed to reach the bush on which Nancy was stuck. He obliged the already exhausted by her screams and fear victim, and climbed higher to pass the rope to the standing men. The further ascent was even more difficult and proved no easy test for the shepherd. The surface of the rock was uneven and covered in small cracks, making every step dangerous. Despite this, he kept moving upward, overcoming fear and fatigue. His hands were slipping on the smooth surface of the rock, but he persevered on his way to the safe path where he was eagerly awaited. Finally, by the combined efforts of his father, the guide, the young man, and several male hikers, the distressed Nancy was pulled out. "My dear," shaking hands with his daughter's savior and hugging him tightly, almost crying, said Stephen. "Thank you so much for saving our treasure. Ask for anything you want. Any amount will pay it all." "Thank you. I'm fine." The young man was embarrassed. "I'm glad I could help, and I'm happy I did. Now I must go before my herd scatters all over the plateau. Goodbye, our savior." Adriana hugged the boy goodbye, with tears of joy. "Goodbye." The young man said goodbye to everyone and disappeared from sight around a dangerous corner. "What a noble lad," said Nancy, Stephen's mother. "He should be thanked anyway." Tanya interrupted Stephen's wife. "Now we must think of a way to bring her daughter to her senses. I'll deal with this shepherd later." "Yes, of course," agreed Adriana. "Take Christopher and Molly. Hold their hands. Do not let them out until we come down from this stupid mountain." Otis, the head of the family, gave instructions, and I'll carry the cash in my arms. "There's an ambulance waiting for you at the bottom," the tour guide remarked, "and I'll go with you to help and back you up on the descent." "Thank you," thanked the man, taking Nancy in his arms. He commanded, "Let's go." Of course, none of the Otis continued after all the events. A car tour through the towns of Georgia. They returned to Tbilisi to the hotel where they had stayed earlier. There Nancy spent several days under the care of a private doctor. The girl lay on her bed, drowning in soft change. Her long hair was spread over the pillow, and her face was lightly touched with a blush. She was dressed in a light white shirt, which beautifully lightened her slender figure. The room during the day was always flooded with sunlight, the rays of which penetrated through the open window, filling the air with warmth and coziness. On the wall opposite the bed hung a painting of a mountain landscape. This subject later on reminded the victim very much of what had happened. Eventually, she took it down and put it away. Coming to her senses, Nancy settled down to recall all the events that had taken place that day. For from the shock, it seemed to her as if none of it had been real, as if it had not been with her. But she knew that her life had almost been cut short on that stupid slope for wanting to take a cool picture. Mom told Camille about her rescuer, who was on a tip from nearby. "We wanted to thank him," Mom shared with her, "but he said he didn't need anything. Dad tried to give him an envelope with a small amount, but he handed it back. I want to thank him myself," Nancy said confidently. "Where can I find him?" "What's his name?" "Nancy, dear, he has a very interesting name, Rick. And he's not hard to find, not far from his father. He grills kebabs for tourists in the countryside and herds his sheep. But first, you have to get your strength and eat," Adriana warned. The next morning, without informing her parents, but only leaving a note in the room, Nancy went in search of her savior. On the way, she bought a small souvenir, a bottle of Vegiani wine. The girl very quickly found the parking lot of her savior, and when she hesitantly froze quite close, she could make out the young man who had pulled her through the abyss. Rick appeared to be a man with a distinctly Georgian appearance. Tall, slender, with dark hair and slightly swarthy skin. When he turned in her direction, Nancy glared at his eyes, which had an unusually deep dark color, almost black. "Hello," was all Nancy could utter. Both answered in their native language. "Rick, what can I do for you?" "I'm you." The girl was confused. "You don't remember me. A couple days ago, you saved me. I fell off a cliff, and a beautiful stranger smiled, and a guy, for the rescue of which everyone wants to hand me money. I'm glad you're okay. But I'm not going to change my mind about the financial reward. Every self-respecting man would do the same. My name is Nancy." The girl blushed. "And I didn't come for that. Or rather, I came to thank you for saving me. But I didn't bring money. I brought wine. They say it's very tasty. I thought you might like to accept such a modest gift from a rescued person. Nice to meet you. Nancy. My name is Rick. But you obviously already know that from the wine. Thank you." Chuckles. "It's my pleasure. Would you like a kebab? I'd love one." While Rick prepared the necessary ingredients, sliced the meat, forgot our puree, and set them on the brazier, Nancy was chopping onions and spooning Billy sauce over the meat to make it more succulent. As we talked, the young man kept making sure the meat didn't burn but was still good about roasting, and in doing so, he never stopped sharing stories from his life. Nancy listened avidly to Rick's pleasant, deep, and richly toned timbre, which seemed to nod to the girl. The young people had long ago switched to you and were telling each other about themselves and eating freshly fried kebabs with great appetite. By the middle of the conversation, Nancy suddenly realized that she had fallen in love. And Rick, as if nothing had happened, continued to talk about his life. "I live here in the foothills, and only in the summer. My parents worked hard, and I grew up with an uncle, and who had no family of his own. He is now almost 70 years old. Bidzina. It's hard. Housekeeping. So here I am helping out as and when I can bat." He through Nancy. "That means uncle in Georgian," smiled back Rick. "Sometimes I have native Georgian words and expressions in my speech, although I speak more Russian. I even study at a Russian-speaking university. Which one? Where? And for whom?" I asked a young man a lot of questions. Nancy, you don't think I'm prying. I'm just curious. I still haven't decided what I want to study. My parents gave me a year to decide. I'm studying at the Faculty of Humanities at Paralysed State University. Believe me, I didn't choose where I got into school. You only help your uncle in the summer. And I live in a dormitory. But soon I'll graduate, and I hope to find a job close to home to keep helping him. And I myself like to take care of pledges, chickens, and other household chores. Tell me about your life as a student. Asked, chewing another piece of fried meat. I'm very interested. Student life is full of adventures and interesting events or innovations, began the story Rick. Every day becomes a new challenge for us. So everyone stared fearfully at the guy, perplexed Nancy. No, of course not, laughed the shepherd. I'm just kidding. But we do have adventures, although it's more of a quest. What kind of quest? Who has time to bathe before the couples? Generally the showers, which is one for the whole floor. Rick started listing off by twiddling his thumbs, then whether you can have breakfast, because someone might have already eaten your food or burned the kettle. Bloody hell. That's all the girl could say. But you get used to it quickly. It's very interesting at university. We socialize a lot with friends, with classmates, play computer games, and I often read books. You can participate in various student clubs and activities, which helps you develop your skills and knowledge. I like to read too. I even dream of writing. I don't know yet though. Nancy shared her thoughts. What exactly are you reading? But I really like John. Without thinking, answered Rick. Well, and Russian classics I read. I'm interested in that too. I was especially impressed by Dostoevsky. And you have a favorite book? I'm a book music lover, said Nancy. I read everything that I like and interested in the annotations, but more often it's detectives, fantasy, novels, but not love, but family sagas, for example. And my favorite is A Banal Bookmaster and Margarita. Everyone knows it now. Yeah, it's incredibly popular, and I'm cool with it. I have another favorite book, Perfumer. The story of one murderer, shared by a girl and Jane Eyre. These 3 books I collect in different editions and translations. Good choices, great literary taste, praised Rick. As for me, I can't collect a big library yet, but as soon as I graduated from college and settled either in my parents' house or in my uncle's, I realized my dream to collect the entire collection of books by Sergei Lukianenko. Wonderful plans, said Camille, raising her glass. We should drink to the realization of dreams. Let's drink to dreams that should come true. Rick won the hearts of a young metropolitan girl who had never seen such a handsome, intelligent, and brave man. When he decided to walk Nancy to the hotel, the girl agreed. Almost reaching the hotel, she confessed her sympathy to the young man. Rick was not averse to having an affair with a beautiful young Russian woman, so he offered her to meet tomorrow and go on a date. Happy and elated Nancy returned to the hotel in high spirits, where her angry parents, who could not contact her all day, were waiting for her. After all, the glossless had left her cell phone in her room. The young couple met in secret. Nancy was afraid to tell their parents that she was in a relationship with a Georgian. She had to come up with ridiculous excuses not to go to dinner with her family or not to participate in excursions. But the date of their departure arrived. The day before, Rick and Nancy exchanged contacts and promised to write and call each other constantly. The rest of the summer and the whole fall the lovers spent at a distance. They were constantly video calling and texting every minute of the day. On winter vacation, Nancy decided to come to her beloved in Paralysed, but she came up with a completely different story for her parents. What was it? Surprised Adriana. When the daughter announced her plans for the winter holidays, ski resort, Nancy told us, in Adygia and Krasnodar region, Lisa, and I want to go skiing for a week. 2 young, beautiful girls tried to talk my daughter Stephen out of going. One will go to hell to go skiing. Unthinkable. You think it over. I'm not talking to Lisa. She has her own parents. But we're not done with you yet. But Dad started to whine and pity Nancy. Her parents are letting her go. And I'm stuck here like a schoolgirl in front of you, going to a night disco. We'll get rooms. We'll be supervised by instructors. It's a gated community. I promise we won't go off base. Crazy. All right, Mom agreed, with the condition that you stay in touch at all times. Thanks, Mommy, I will. No one asks me, as usual, spotted me by the bullet. Well, please, okay, waved in the direction of his daughter Otis. But keep Mommy's condition. What can I do with you? You're gonna be 19 soon. You're Miss Independent. Thank you very much. Nancy hugged her father. I'll run to the Mariinsky and pack my bags. Don't you need to buy tickets? Adriana asked. I already bought them. I knew you would agree. Sending a kiss from the stairs, the girl ran to her room. The girl very quickly got ready for the road, persuaded Lisa to fly with her, but only to Georgia, not to Moisture. And happy on January 1, she flew with her friend to Paralysed. Rick met them there, joyful and madly in love with his girlfriend. The friend settled in a separate room, but when her parents called, Nancy was always near, creating the necessary alibi. And in the rest of the time the girl was walking, getting acquainted with the city and national peculiarities on her own. After all, Nancy did not leave her beloved not a step away. Rick decided to show the girl in the capital of Georgia what they had not seen with their parents in one of the evenings, when the sun was slowly descending over Paralysed, enveloping the city in a golden pink glow, and the city walls, decorated with ancient frescoes and mosaics, sparkled in the rays of the setting sun like precious stones. The boy led Nancy through the narrow streets of the city. They walked leisurely, holding hands. Among the ancient buildings and ancient churches they strolled, inhaling the fragrance of blossoming trees and listening to the birds singing. The lovers were like two parts of one whole, perfectly complementing each other. He was tall and slender with hair the color of raven, winged and graceful, and delicate. With long curls, Nancy's eyes glowed with love and joy as she looked at Rick. That evening they passed by small cafes and restaurants, where the locals were enjoying their evening out, sipping flavored coffee and eating delicious and Georgian dishes. The lovers stopped to buy fresh fruit and sweets from the street vendors. As they strolled through the old town, they noticed a group of musicians playing traditional instruments. Rick and Nancy stopped to listen to the music and enjoy the atmosphere of old Tbilisi. The next day, they decided to go to the botanical garden for a picnic. And tonight they danced under the stars, accompanied by street musicians, enjoying each other's company. In the morning, Rick and Nancy bought hot chachapuri and lemonade and went to the botanical gardens for a picnic. The landscape of the botanical garden in Paralysed impressed the young lady very much. It is more like a big forest in a canton surrounded by mountains, she said to her young man as she walked past several ponds with frogs. After looking at the waterfalls and stopping and sitting down on the grass near the stream, how beautiful it is here. Close your eyes and take in the atmosphere of this wonderful place, said Nancy. You can hardly hear the sounds of the city here. Yes, agreed Rick. It's a place of strength for me. I like to come here, find a cozy corner, and have a little picnic. We, by the way, as long as we walked, never once saw a single cafe, and you won't find one here. At several tropics you can meet vending machines with water and soda, shared information about his favorite place Topaz. This place is still a bit original, and the authorities do not want to spoil the landscape of the garden. We do not meet such a thing in Moscow, laughed. If there is a park, square, garden, and so on, there is bound to be a cafe, restaurant, or small stores with ready-to-eat food. I know. I was in the Russian capital a couple of times with my parents. I didn't really like it. Why such a big city? So many places to visit. Nancy wondered. It's too noisy, too crowded, and the subway. Rick laughed. I've never quite figured it out. You haven't been to St. Petersburg yet, said the girl. Tell me, where will we go tomorrow? And the day after tomorrow before we leave? Do you have plans? Yes, of course. Rick said mysteriously. Let's eat, or the chachapuri will get cold. The next day, the couple spent almost the whole day in the room watching movies and eating junk food. And in the evening, having put on comfortable shoes, Rick took Nancy to the Tabora Monastery. It was not crowded to watch the sunset at the temple, and from the observation deck, there was a beautiful view of small and charming Tbilisi. And the next evening before departure, Rick proposed to the girl in a restaurant, quietly having dinner and enjoying each other's company. The young people reached the dessert. What was Nancy's amazement when instead of ordering a new Anna Pavlova cake, she was brought a red velvet box on her plate. At that moment, Rick got down on one knee in front of the girl. "Whose are you, the meaning of my life?" The guy started his speech, confused in languages. "I don't have enough words in Russian and Georgian languages to express all the feelings I have near you. Sweetheart, become mine forever. Make me happy. Marry me." "I will," exclaimed happy Nancy. I do, agreed Rick. Putting the ring on her finger, her lover kissed her and lifted her in his arms, encircling her, and then asked her to dance. Against the background of their idyll, and sounded a small restaurant orchestra, which created an atmosphere of love, tranquility, and happiness. So ended an unforgettable week for the couple in love, and began a new story engaged Nancy and Rick at the airport. Saying goodbye, they knew that they parted for a short time, because the girl decided to immediately tell her parents about everything. Upon arrival in Moscow, the friends said goodbye and got into different cabs. The driver Nancy turned on a quiet, soothing music, which helped the girl to relax a little and forget about all the problems and worries. As they drove through the night city, Nancy looked at the twinkling lights and thought about how beautiful the capital was. Finally, after a short but pleasant ride, they pulled up to the girl's house. The cab driver helped unload the luggage and said goodnight. Nancy, thanking him for the wonderful ride, paid for his services. Having gone up to her floor, she opened the door of the apartment and breathed in the familiar, cozy smell of her native home. "I won't tell them anything today," Nancy thought, hugging her parents. All the talking in the morning. Family. Joyful and disembodied Nancy flew into the dining room. "I have wonderful news for you." So anxious to know what his daughter's news was on getting married, the girl blurted out. "I mean, Christopher choked on his tea." "Nancy, what kind of joke is that?" Adriana gasped in surprise. "Who is he?" asked the father. "It's not a joke." Putting her hand up and showing her ring, Nancy replied, "My fiancé, Rick. We have been together for a long time, and we love each other." "Is this the shepherd who saved you?" asked the brother. "Yes, he is. I went to thank him and couldn't part with him. After we left, we stayed in touch all the time, and on New Year's Eve, I decided to visit him." "So you didn't go to see him?" Mom asked. "No. I went to Tbilisi again, but I was really with Lisa. I didn't know how you would feel about the fact that I went there, so I lied a little. But I have a little decency started to tell off my daughter Stephen. And the fact that you are together and that he proposed to you is an even bigger lie." Sweetie turned to Nancy, the mom. "He's Georgian. Are you ready to be a Muslim?" "Mom, in Georgia, the main religion is the Orthodox Church. We were told about it on the tours, but it's still weird. She's a big girl. Let her decide for herself. We're not thrilled, but he seems like a nice guy. Invite Rick and his parents over." Nancy squealed with joy, threw herself on her father's neck, and smacked her parents on the cheek, and rushed off to call her fiancé with the news and an invitation to come over. Rick agrees with the bride's parents and decides to come with his parents. In 2 weeks, they will return from a business trip and stay in Moscow to wait for their son from Georgia. The long-awaited day came when the son's parents were to meet at the Moscow airport early in the morning. Robert, Kevin, and Miranda drove to the airport to meet Rick. Although they were excited, the parents tried to stay calm and not show their emotions. When they saw him in the arrivals, all their hearts sank with happiness. Rick ran up to them, and the parents hugged the young man tightly. Unable to hold back tears of joy when everyone calmed down a bit, the trio went to a restaurant to have lunch. share the news of the last year they hadn't seen each other, and discuss their upcoming introduction to their future in-laws. Rick was the first to speak, the head of the family. "Tell us about the girl and her parents." "We don't know anything." "Yes, my boy." Miranda supported the father. "You really surprised us with the wedding and meeting the parents. Do you remember that I told you that I saved a girl who fell off a cliff near the plateau where I was herding my uncle's sheep?" "Yes." The parents responded with glee. "So she and I started hanging out," Rick continued. "And after a while we started dating. But then they moved away. But we kept in touch by phone and video. And times. Robert, Kevin, and HIV love long distance through the phone. And to meet in real life to go get a sweetheart. But we met a few months later on New Year's vacation in Paralysed." Rick gasped with surprise at the young man's mother. "The girl came to you, not you to her. It happened that way. She suggested it, and I agreed." "Blurred eyes," replied the young man. "But after a week together, I realized that I did not want to let her go and made her an offer." "You asked for money for that?" "Yes," continued Rick. "After the proposal, Nancy went home and told her parents about our engagement. And they, in turn, invited us all over to meet her. And here we are," Robert Marlowe stated. "And here you are. I'll call Camille and see if they're expecting us, or if they're not ready yet." "Okay." After looking at the menu, Miranda decided to order. "I'm gonna grab a cup of coffee." We met the family at the Otis apartment. The whole family fussed on the bed on the table and preparing for the upcoming acquaintance. Nancy was anticipating the meeting with her beloved, not thinking about how this acquaintance of parents would go. She spent almost the entire morning in front of the mirror, examining her reflection. From there, a young, beautiful, slender brown woman whose green eyes shone with intelligence and kindness looked back at the girl. Nancy styled her long hair so that it fell over her shoulders in soft waves. It took her a long time to decide what to wear, and in the end, she chose a dark blue dress with a deep neckline in the back and short sleeves. Only the dress was decorated with delicate lace, which emphasized her thin waist, and the skirt was lush and long, which gave the girl an additional grace and elegance. Hearing the intercom ringing and her mother shouting that guests were on their way, Nancy was quickly caught up. On her neck, a graceful necklace of white gold with diamonds, which complemented her image, and in her ears on the move inserted small earrings, carnations with the same diamonds. The image of the girl was completed with elegant shoes, loafers, which she managed to put on right before the front doors opened. And since he was dressed with a needle, he was wearing a classic suit, obviously sewn to individual order. Leather shoes on his feet, his face was smoothly shaved, and his hair was neatly styled. The young Georgian was smiling, and his smile was so sincere and warm that it was impossible not to smile back. He looked at Nancy with love and respect. Barely crossing the threshold, he greeted his parents. His lover gave flowers to Stephen, and Adriana shook his hand. There was silence in the apartment for a second. And then there was a sound of ice cream for the kids, ice cream for his grandmother, flowers. Be careful not to confuse Kutuzov. After this quote, the space exploded with ringing laughter from everyone present. Once everyone had calmed down, Rick corrected the errors of his greeting and introduced his parents, and Nancy hers. Then everyone made their way to the table. A huge table was set up in the living room, left with a variety of dishes. Adriana had made sure that everyone was comfortable and no one would go hungry. That's why there were traditional Georgian kakapuri, lamb kebab, homemade pickles, and much more. Even though the Otis family was very friendly, open, and outgoing, and the Marlowe family was more reserved, they still managed to find a common language. The women talked about their hobbies and shared food recipes, and the men joked a lot and talked about fishing. The younger Otis children felt out of place, surrounded by adults who were having a great time talking amongst themselves. And the older sister couldn't help but admire her lover. So Christopher and Molly went to their father's study after dinner to watch TV there. Toward the end of the evening, before dessert was served, Adriana called the younger Otis to the table. As the woman brought out the cake, topped gracefully with flower petals and brightly colored fruit, Molly slipped her tights-clad feet onto the tile and fell right under her mother's feet. What happened next was like a slow-motion movie. Adriana managed to stay on her feet, but was blown over by the cake. It flew over Molly, through the poof, and landed on the floor, doing several flips in the air. Everyone was scared for the little girl, who was making strange noises. But rushing to her, the parents heard Molly laughing, smearing cream and dessert sprinkles all over her face. And the cake was really good. Smiling, Molly said, licking her fingers, "Now I'm like a sweet dessert too." After examining the girl and realizing that she was all right, everyone exhaled, and looking at the brown stain, flying petals from the bridge, and grimy 6-year-old girl began to laugh. On that happy note, the families laughed the rest of the evening, exchanged gifts, blessed the children with marriage, and promised to support each other in times of need. Rick and Nancy could not be happy with this outcome and did not let go of each other's hands all evening. When Robert, Kevin, and Miranda and their son left, Nancy's parents began to clean the table and mop the floor, trying to clean up the chocolate already under the juice. Adriana and Stephen, having sent the children to bed, for some time discussed the previous evening and thought about what kind of wedding to organize for the young people. "We'll talk to Nancy in the morning," said the head of the family. "It's not for us to marry them to decide." Nancy started talking to her daughter, Adriana. "We really liked Rick's family, and he was at his best when he rescued you." "Yeah." Stephen stepped in, a well-mannered boy and parents. "Good for them, but they're traveling a lot. They don't know much about their son, but it's a good impression. We're going to apply tomorrow," Nancy said. "What kind of wedding in April?" Mom asked. "It's cold. It's raining. We'll only celebrate in a restaurant. There's no off-site registration in the countryside." Mom interrupted Adriana's daughter's monologue. "We don't want all that tinsel with the restaurant, the ransom, and everything." "What do you want?" The father decided to ask his daughter. "Rick and I just want to get married in beautiful suits, have a small photo shoot just for two, and fly to Tbilisi to the mountains." In a dreamy voice, Nancy told of her wedding plans. "And what about me and this sweetheart? What about Christopher and Molly?" Adriana asked. "What about our memories of our happiest day, our loved ones?" "Adriana, stop pushing your daughter," interrupted his wife Stephen. "They want to modestly sign and fly away. Then that's what we want, too. I'll pay for you any dress you want and help with the trip. At least we'll be able to go to the registry office." Barely audible, Mom asked. "Of course, at the registry office, Rick and I are waiting for all our nearest and dearest," hugging her parents, said Nancy. "Thank you for your love." Filing to register their marriage the next day, Nancy and her friend Lisa went in search of a magical wedding dress. "Don't look at the price," her father texted. "Pick the one you like." The girls went around many stores and boutiques, but could not find what they needed. Finally, in one of the bridal salons, the girls saw a dress that immediately caught their attention. Nancy said to Lisa with a gasp, "This is your dress. I don't see any other on you. Go a model bride," listened to her friend, especially since she herself liked the dress very much. The consultant helped the girl to get dressed, and when the curtain opened in front of Lisa's gaze, Nancy appeared in an elegant wedding dress. The corset dress was adorned with a beautiful train and a shimmering bottom. The puffy skirt was adorned with a wide ribbon, which made the fragile image of the young bride chic and at the same time very delicate. Her friends were amazed at how well the dress looked on Nancy. Her green eyes sparkled and her brown hair complemented the look perfectly and blended perfectly with the cream color of the dress. It was the very dress the girls were looking for, paying for the purchase with Daddy's card. The friends went to shoe and jewelry stores to put together the entire wedding look. With makeup and hairstyle, we'll not have to worry. Lisa graduated from makeup artist training and moonlighted as a makeup artist by picking up women for various events on the wedding day. From early in the morning, the Otis home was bustling with activity. The parents were waiting for the groom's family, and the bride and her friend were getting ready for their room when their parents arrived. Stephen went to get his daughter to bring her down from the second floor of the apartment to the groom's room. When Nancy and her father appeared at the top of the stairs, Rick gasped. The bride was wearing a beautiful dress that emphasized her figure. The long train was carried by Lisa and Molly. The girl's hair was styled in a beautiful updo, from which a few strands were released. These strands framed, and white face, which was decorated delicately. Makeup in hand, Nancy held a bouquet of flowers that matched her dress perfectly. The bride looked very happy and smiled at all the relatives. Her eyes glistened with joy, and her cheeks were ruddy with excitement. The marriage registration took place in Shipolov in the registry office itself. It attracted the newlyweds by the fact that it had a spacious registration hall and was conveniently located near the Terrazzino Park, where they were to have a photo shoot. Guests congratulated the young ones when they came out of the registry office doors, pelted them with flowers, and gave them gifts. In Terrazzino Park, you can feel like in a fairy tale. There is everything here for a romantic and beautiful wedding photo session of Rick and Nancy. They shot against the background of flowering gardens, picturesque ponds on elegant bridges, and in cozy grids next to antique columns and sculptures. Bright and emotional photos of the newlyweds were taken. On the same day, the newlyweds went on a wedding trip to the mountains. However, not to Belize as planned, but to Austria. The tourist brochure promised an unforgettable variety of hikes. Nancy and Rick decided that they would walk along the trails along the river, occasionally taking the Penguin elevator to gain more than 1,000 meters in altitude. And they also agreed to make time for the main attraction of Meyer, Hoffman, Berlin, Rachelhen, Vigo. This is the name of the Berlin high-altitude route, which is an 8-day walk from hut to hut, during which tourists have the opportunity to explore the high alpine scenery of the Zieler Nature Park and spend the night at the end of each leg of the journey in a hut. It seemed convenient to the newlyweds, and the fact that from each point there is a route back to the valley, if suddenly they do not like something. After landing at the airport and getting to the hotel, Nancy called her parents and told them about their joint plans to hike the 16th and 17th century Berlin route. She warned that the couple would be out of touch in places, but as soon as she had a chance, she would be sure to let her parents know. 2 days later, Rick and Nancy went on an 8-day hike on the high mountain trail, from where the newlyweds never called Stephen and Adriana, who could not find a place for fear for their daughter. But remembering what Rick is capable of, how selflessly he once saved Nancy, decided to wait for news. But they got the news only when the daughter reported in a text message that she was coming home, and the number of her flight-excited parents went to the airport and immediately saw in the passengers their distraught Spruce and daughter, and her husband was not around. Apparently was not. Shouted Nancy. Stephen and Adriana rushed towards their daughter, who burst into tears when she saw her parents. Dad and Mom could not get a word out of the girl, so they decided to go home and there try to calm and talk to her. At home, finally, Nancy was able to tell her relatives what had happened on the wedding trip. We went to 19th century Berlin. Occasional sobs. Nancy was talking. 2 points we passed successfully. We were happy. At some point I realized something was wrong with Rick. He was ill. Adriana impatiently interrupted her daughter. No, replied Nancy. I wish he was sick. He just pulled away from me. And on the 3rd day, when we were to continue to the 4th hut, I did not find my husband in our room. I first wanted to go look for him outside, but then I saw a note that he had gone. Where had he gone? Dad asked. Just gone sobbing, said Nancy. Nothing more was said. I decided to turn off the highway and go back to the hotel. There I found that Rick had already been there, packed his things, and withdrew all the money from his card. What money? The one I gave you for your wedding. Yeah, and the money I had before the wedding. Nancy ended her story sadly. What a rascal. And you decided to come back right away. Consoling her daughter, Adriana asked, We should report him. We should report him. Stephen resented him. "No," Nancy exclaimed. "We're not gonna file a report on anybody. If all he wanted from me was money, I'd learn to throw myself in the deep end. But I can't believe it. He looked at me with such love." Before she could finish her sentence, she burst into tears. "Honey," Adriana said, hugging her daughter tightly. Stephen walked out of the room, leaving his wife and daughter from them. He was in a rage. The man decided to call the saints to find out what this behavior of their son was, why he had committed such a despicable act. Dialing Robert, and barely waiting for the matchmaker to pick up the phone, he began to straighten things out. Stephen abruptly interrupted his Marlowe monologue. "Wait, I don't know what you're talking about. What did your son do?" Having calmed down a little, continued the conversation. Stephen Otis left his wife at the resort and ripped her off. "What? Where do you get such information about a daughter who is hysterical, who was able to return home only because she had some money in cash, who was left alone in a strange country?" Nervously replied Nancy's father. "That can't be true." Robert Kevin said absent-mindedly. "He phoned just yesterday, saying how they were having a great time on their own. But that means he's having a great time with some other Camille," said Stephen Riley. "Because our Nancy at home is devastated by your son's behavior. I'll look into it," Marlowe promised. "I'll find out where Rick is and why he stole money from your daughter. We're very sorry this happened. But honey and I don't know what happened. Our son truly loves your daughter. I see Stephen has decided to stop talking. Deal with your son, but don't let me see him in my house until he decides to apologize and return the money." Nancy didn't leave the apartment for a month. Christopher tried not to hit on his sister, and little Molly wanted to cheer her up, but she couldn't do it. After another 2 weeks, the girl began to feel nauseous. Otis first thought it was stress and malnutrition, but Nancy noticed on the woman's calendar that she was 3 weeks late. She asked her mom to buy a pregnancy test, informing her of the delay and taking a test the evening and morning of the next day. Nancy saw 2 bright red stripes on the white small cardboard. Mom called out through the closed bathroom door, and Nancy was confirmed. What to do? "Nancy, whatever do you decide to keep the baby or not?" Adriana answered her daughter. "We have to go to the doctor, get an ultrasound and find out the time frame, and then make a decision. Sign me up for breakfast." "Okay, sweetie. And don't tell anyone yet," I asked Nancy. She looked out the door. "Not Daddy, not my brother and sister." It was a deal. The next day, she and her mom went to the private clinic where their gynecologist was waiting for them. She was asked to lie down on the couch. A special gel was applied and a monitor was turned on which a special scanner reflects the uterus where the doctor can see the pregnancy. "Congratulations, Nancy," with a smile on her face, said the doctor. "You have a MASH and a pregnancy. I'm 8 to 9 weeks along, which is consistent with your delay. I can still get an abortion?" asked Nancy. "In principle, yes. Up to 12 weeks, it's possible. But I wouldn't advise surgical intervention at that stage. There are risks. There's already a heartbeat." Adriana just asked. "Turn it on. Let him listen to it." "Yeah, sure." The gynecologist answered without taking her eyes off the monitor. "Your baby is within the normal range of 140 beats per minute. Listen to this." And in those heartbeats, Nancy heard her baby telling her that he was alive and wanted to be born. "It's like my mom knew I couldn't have an abortion if I heard my baby's heart beating." Thought pregnant, letting some mucus out. Back home, they reported the pregnancy to Stephen, who was shocked and didn't know how to react. But he supported his daughter, who was already in a state of shock. And in the first stage of depression, parents decided to send their daughter for treatment for depression in a sanatorium. Prudently negotiated the form of treatment taking into account Nancy's pregnancy. The girl was brought to the sanatorium for 3 weeks. The Otis family rented an apartment not far from the facility so that they would not leave their daughter alone and would be close by even if they could not see Nancy. When they checked the girl into the sanatorium, the head doctor told them that there were 2 psychiatrists, 2 psychotherapists, 2 rehabilitation physicians, and 2 clinical psychologists working in the unit designed to treat depressive spectrum disorders. We also had nurses, along with the initial secondary medical education and experience in medicine for at least 5 years, have a higher psychological education, proudly reported the chief doctor. There is also a procedural nurse, a hostess, a social worker, and a maid to clean the wards. Nancy uncomplainingly agreed to the treatment, hoping to recover before she gave birth. As she checked into her local room and sorted out some of her belongings, she stood at the window and looked out at the beautiful landscape, green trees, blue sky, and bright sunshine. Her room was small but cozy. She had everything she needed for a comfortable 3-week stay: a bed, a nightstand, a closet, and a dressing table. There were paintings of nature on the walls, which added to the coziness. The room even had its own bathroom with a shower and a small washing machine. There was a knock on the door to inform them that there was breakfast waiting for Nancy in the dining room. Going there, she chose an omelet, yogurt, fruit, and coffee. After eating, Nancy decided to take a walk around the grounds. There is still time before the appointment with the attending physician, Lulu thought, leaving the tray near the kitchen and thanking the dining room staff. The territory of the sanatorium was fenced and was very beautiful and well maintained. There were camille with trees, flower beds with flowers, fountains, and gazebos for relaxing. Camille walked around Camille, enjoyed the fresh air, and listened to the birds singing, not thinking at that moment about anything but the child who was now in her womb. What should she do? How to raise the baby? Would she be able to cope with it? These were the questions that Nancy was asking herself every day, adding more negativity to her condition. Suddenly, the phone vibrated in her pocket, announcing that it was time for her to go to the doctor's office. The doctor's office was only small, but cozy. The walls were painted light blue, and the floor was covered with linoleum already yellowed from sunlight. In the center of the room stood a table, on which were medical documents and some medicines. Next to the table was a cabinet with books on medicine. On the wall hung posters with pictures of the human body and its organs. I wonder, she thought, why he needs the internal structure of the body if they are more brain right. She listened to the doctor in half an ear, occasionally nodding her head and trying to absorb his speech, which just poured in a huge stream. Our sanatorium provides a full range of therapeutic procedures for people with depression, recovering the body after severe stress. Digging through the documents, doctor. Treatment of depression in the sanatorium is carried out according to a special program, which includes diet, hospital, therapy, physiotherapist, physical therapy. Rehabilitation after depression will not only restore your psychological balance, but also bring back the brightness of colors in life. Good mood of joy, positive outlook, especially since you're about to become a mother. On a diet, I will not sit down, gave voice Nancy, and I've already lost a lot of weight. And I don't eat unhealthy, and I'm satiated with small amounts of food. Well, made a note in the chart. Sick, lying down. What about physical therapy? Gentle, of course. I agree, she sighed. If you think it will help me, it should. But most importantly, it should help you. A change of lifestyle, a change of residence, temporary. And no one will remind you of your depression after we meet. You're just resting in a sanitarium. I'm not getting any medication. No. Looking into Nancy's eyes, the attending physician answered, your condition can be normalized without medication. At least I think so. Especially since you're pregnant. We wouldn't risk it. Thank you for your answers. I was the only patient who thanked me for my understanding. I thought it would be much worse, and that I would get nagged for being depressed. We're professionals, and when a person is really depressed, there's a good reason for it. And we don't know many of yours. And personally, I don't see anything wrong with that happening to you, do you? Thank you. Almost in a whisper said Camille, who still thought that she was not behaving appropriately to the situation. Here's your spa book. There is your treatment. And here, opening the penultimate page, The doctor pointed to the top line of your schedule of sessions with the psychologist. No one insists, and if you don't show up, no one will scold you. But if I were you, I'd go at least a couple times. I will. On her way out, Nancy said goodbye. Goodbye. Goodbye, Nancy. You'll come to see me on your last day, too. I'll prepare the discharge. All right, thank you. After these words, the door closed behind the girl. But the attending doctor looked at her for some time, thinking about Nancy's difficult life situation and sympathizing with her. While Nancy was being treated for depression in the sanatorium, the girl's parents and brother and sister were also vacationing in Kislovodsk, constantly walking and taking part in many excursions. Otis did not have enough vocabulary to describe to her friends all the beauty of Kislovodsk. Masha was telling her friend Adriana that Kislovodsk is a famous resort of the Caucasus. Since the 19th century, it has been attracting tourists with its picturesque views, clean mountain air, and of course, its famous mineral water. Narzan. Everyone comes here to improve their physical and spiritual health. The friends listened with great pleasure about the famous resort. They looked at photos and watched video stories. National Park in Kislovodsk made a great impression on everyone. The largest city park in his. Adriana had to answer a lot of questions from her friends, telling interesting facts she had heard from the guide. Its creation began back in the first half of the 19th century and continued with varying success in the following 100 years. Stony banks were made fertile by black soil, and plant seedlings were imported from different parts of Eurasia, including Crimea, the Carpathians, and Georgia. The woman quoted the guide as saying, "As the territory expanded, the park was divided into lower, middle, and upper ones, each with its own unique attractions. What kind of plants, trees are there?" The girl wondered. Best friend Adriana. On the territory of the Valley of Roses, one of the parts of the park planted more than 36 species of roses, which fragrant and pleasing to look at. Nancy's mom shared her memories. "I don't know about the others. The roses just struck me." Every evening, the Otis family strolled along Kourtny Boulevard, passing 400 poplar trees. Despite the fact that the walking area is only half a kilometer long, here is located a huge number of architectural attractions. Among the architectural structures that attracted the attention of Adriana and Stephen, the old building of the Officers' Assembly, the former Grand Hotel, which now houses the Narzan Sanatorium, as well as the former Podvory Ta Hotel. Every time they passed by these beautiful buildings, the whole family made up different stories about those who might have lived in these apartments. Thus, 3 weeks passed. Nancy had successfully completed her treatment and was sent home. She hoped to learn something about her husband, from whom she was still not divorced. But her father and the matchmakers had no information about his whereabouts. Rick only occasionally wrote to his parents, informing them that he was alive and well. Pregnant Camille coped with the oppressive condition every day and was helped a lot by her loved ones. At the 32nd week of pregnancy, Nancy gave birth to a baby boy and named him Noah. The baby was born a sturdy 3 kilograms, 750 grams, and 57 centimeters tall. Grandparents could not be happy with the boy, who was very similar to his father, but Rick everything except the color of his eyes. Moms, which was extremely surprising, but what only nature will not create. Nancy and her son were greeted from the hospital by the entire Otis family. There was also a friend Lisa, and even Rick's parents arrived on the day of discharge. Time went by very slowly for the young mom. Her mood was great. She was already looking forward to seeing her loved ones and introducing them to the new family members. When Nancy and her son finally went into the room for the discharge, she saw how in an instant the excitement on the face of relatives and friends was replaced by great joy. The parents tried very hard to meet their daughter and grandson in a festive way. So there were flowers and balloons and stickers on the car and a photo session. After arriving home, the baby was placed in a crib on the first floor of the apartment, and all the adults went to the dining room to celebrate the discharge. At the table, Robert, Kevin, and Miranda apologizes for the deed of the son and offers help to the daughter-in-law and grandson. Darling stands up and walks over to Nancy, father-in-law. If you need anything, we are always here to help. We are not giving up on our Noah. Putting her arm around her daughter-in-law's shoulders, Miranda said, "He's our breed. He's our Schwilly grandson." Thank you. Thanked Nancy to her husband's parents. I know you are not to blame for Rick's behavior and do not know where he is, so you don't need to keep apologizing for it. He embarrassed us, said Robert. What he did was wrong. When I get nervous and often say things in my native language, I'm sorry, yes, we noticed, trying to diffuse the situation, said Adriana. We will soon speak Georgian ourselves. We already know so many words. And then everyone laughed. Yes, so loudly and resoundingly that woke up Noah, who peacefully advised in the crib. In general, the baby was surprisingly calm. He did not scream, just let his mother sleep. Only when he began to cut his teeth, he became a little cranky. But it quickly passed. During the first few weeks of life, the baby learns to control his body and interact with the world around him. Starting to smile, walk around and reach for objects. Nancy coped well with taking care of the baby. Almost without asking for help from her mom, depression left the girl. As soon as she saw the face of her Noah lying on her chest in the delivery room, and often took walks with the baby in the park near her home. When the baby fell asleep, she would move to a bench and spend time with a book in the fresh air. Here on Lassany Island, on the territory of the former town of Babushkin, there was Babushkinsky Park, in which Nancy sat. She had loved this park since she was a child. It was as if it had been created for leisurely strolls and relaxation all year round. In warm times, little Lulu would ride a horse here, admire the water play of the lights, the musical fountain, and the whole family watched a movie in the summer theater 5. Now the young mother even had the opportunity to stay on the internet connection with her favorite friends, sitting teenager's tree with Flaubert's favorite novel, Madame Bovary. After all, there's a free Wi-Fi zone. Suddenly, Nancy's phone rang, and an unfamiliar number popped up on the screen, obviously from another country. Camille thought of calling it, but something made her answer it. She heard her husband's familiar voice in the speaker, and she hung up in fear. Barely holding back tears, Camille tried to stop shaking. But then came a text message from the very number that was now calling. Apparently, you recognized my voice, so you hung up. Yeah, it's me. Rick decided to let you know that I'm alive, and I'm okay. Of course, I can't write much in the message, because I always want to say more in person, looking into your eyes. The only thing I want to write is that I'm sorry. I'm very ashamed that I had to do that. But I had huge problems, and I didn't want you to know about them. I want to video call you today to tell you more about it. But if you don't want to talk to me, I understand. I'll call you. And if you don't pick up, I'll never bother you again. She was still not completely calm. She quickly gathered herself, took the stroller, and quickly moved towards the house, where she called her friend to ask her what to do. Still unable to come to a common decision, Nancy decided to listen to her heart and do what it told her to do at that moment. It was lucky her parents weren't home. No one could prevent the girl from having a conversation, should such a thing take place. Taking care of her son, Nancy was able to distract herself a little. But when the phone rang, a familiar tune set to video call, she froze in surprise. Taking the phone in her hands, she didn't hesitate long enough to answer it. The painfully familiar face of her beloved husband appeared on the screen. They were silent for a few minutes, then both of them cried. Having calmed down a little, Nancy's husband began to tell what had happened in his life, that he had to disappear so suddenly for more than a year. Helping my uncle had caused me to miss almost an entire semester. With a sigh, Rick spoke. To keep me from getting expelled, I had to transfer to a tuition-free program, and how to pay for it. It was a shame to ask my parents, so I borrowed money from a loan shark. How did you plan to pay it back? Nancy asked. I thought I'd work and pay it back slowly, but it didn't work out. The interest grew exponentially, and I owed twice as much as I had originally borrowed. I was threatened, beaten. They demanded all the money back at once. They were thugs. Turns out they were. Rick continued the story. 3 days after the last warning, you had an accident. Why didn't you take the reward money from your father then? Didn't he offer it to you? Nancy exclaimed in surprise. But I thought I could solve the financial difficulties myself, and to take money for a deed that anyone could have done. It's not my policy. When you came to me after a time, I decided to improve my financial situation by marrying you. Young, beautiful, and rich. It was all a lie. Holding back tears, Nancy whispered. Our whole relationship, the words, the vows, the promises, all lies. No, Rick interrupted the girl. At first you just seemed to me a beautiful daughter of rich parents, but then I started to grow attached to you. Our long-distance relationship strengthened my feelings, and my desire to marry you was conscious, and it was based on love for you, not love for money. Why did you leave me? But we would have paid the money and lived happily ever after. When they found out I'd married a rich Otis Harris, they ran up the meter and threatened you. So I figured if I dumped you and gave them the money back, they'd calm down. So I did. I kept some of the money I took from you. I went where? To Turkey to work, said Rick with a smile. Sunny Istanbul for a while working for different companies. Now I run a European-style hotel atelier. I make good money and live well. What happened? That you finally decided to contact me. Nancy asked me a question. I missed you. Trite, but true. And there was a twinge in my chest. A couple months ago, it was like something happened to you. So while I was thinking about it, I decided to call you. It's been almost 2 months. I want to apologize to you again. I didn't want to abandon you, leave you alone, or cheat on you at all. But at the time, I felt like I had no other choice. Who's crying? Just a second. Disappeared from the camera view for a moment and returned with little Noah in her arms, who immediately calmed down in her mom's arms. Meet Rick. This is our son, who is almost 2 months old. Your son, he mumbled confusedly. How does he look like me? Except for your eyes. Yes, that's what everyone says. And I noticed it too. As soon as I saw our boy. How stupid am I? He lamented. Forgive me, Nancy, forgive me if you can. I didn't know you were in there. If I had, I would never have left you alone. I didn't know myself. I'm afraid, son, replied Rick's wife, was so heartbroken by your act that she didn't immediately realize I was delayed. You have no idea how hard it was for me. I was depressed. I had to go to a sanitarium. And all this while I was pregnant. It's a good thing it was easy. When I gave birth, I was able to come to my senses and completely dissolve in my son, forgetting about you until you called. I'm so sorry. Rick cried. I know you won't forgive me so easily, but I beg you, give me a chance to make it up to you. Come and visit me in Istanbul. I make good money. I live in a separate apartment, and I can take you and our son. I'll come. Nancy said to introduce you to my son and look into your eyes in person. The day after tomorrow, I'll write down the flight number. Don't call me yet. I'll see you later. See you later, Rick said. And he hung up. That same night, Nancy booked her tickets. The flight leaves tomorrow night, after letting her husband know what time and on what flight she would be arriving. Nancy started packing and waiting for her parents at home to break the news. After 8 o'clock, Adriana and Stephen came back to the apartment and, seeing the suitcases by the front door, immediately thought that something had happened. Camille, her daughter, called out, Mom, please come down and explain what the suitcases are in the hallway. The head of the family shouted from the living room. Hi, I'll run down the stairs. Through Nancy to her parents. I just wanted to talk to you like this, said Adriana, taking hold of her heart and sitting down on the sofa. The last time you told us the news, you were getting married. And before that, you were leaving for your lover by deception. I can't take another news like that. I'm leaving this time too. Nancy stated the fact in front of her parents. To Turkey, and more specifically, Istanbul. And yes, I'm going with no. I think I'll be gone for a while. And then what happens there? Where? Turkey, Stephen shouted. Have you been to Georgia yet? Look how lucky your husband was to steal from you and throw you in the deep end. Do you want a repeat of the scenario? Daddy, don't yell. Rising to his feet, the young mother tried to calm the parent. I'm not 10 years old to do stupid things. With a small child in my arms, I'm going to know his father. Whose father? What kind of father is he? Stephen Otis started to resent him. Wait, how do you know he's there? He called me today and told me everything. I haven't decided if I'm gonna forgive him or not, but it's my duty to introduce my son to his real dad. You're not going anywhere. He wants money from you again. Don't argue with me, Adriana. The man turned to his wife. Say something. Why am I the only one talking to this stupid woman? Stephen. The woman tried to calm her husband. What can you do if she's so determined? Go, baby, if you think it's right. But please, look at the volumes behind the wide-open eyes without rose-colored glasses. What are you talking about? Otis is angry at his wife. He left her, and there's no excuse or forgiveness. I always thought his behavior was strange, sadly said Adriana. He does not look like a man who can abandon his family. Apparently, something terrible happened, and he, being a boy, made a stupid decision. Thank you, Mom, kissed the woman on the cheek. Nancy put her arm around her father's shoulders and ran to her son to feed him. You really think so? Yes, that's exactly what I thought all along. I'm a little shocked, of course. Taking a sip of water, the mom said, Nancy, from our daughter's hasty decisions, but we can't stand on our own. It's her life after all. Good thing after that honeymoon trip we put a tracker in her phone. Stephen chuckled. So we'll know where Nancy is. Okay, so much going on in a day. I want to lie down. Can you at least tell me when your flight is? Adriana asked, walking past the bedroom. We'll walk you out. Okay. Good night. Threw Nancy to her parents. Good night, sweetie, the older Otis said with glee. From the very morning, Nancy was full of energy and impatience. After all, this day promised to be the beginning of an amazing adventure for her and her son. Throughout the day, Nancy went through her suitcases, making lists of things to bring, making sure she had everything. And then the evening before her flight, she had doubts about whether she should go. But the doubt didn't last long. She looked at Noah Nancy and realized she was doing the right thing. Flying to Rick Otis drove her daughter to the airport, 300 hours before the flight. At the airport, they checked their luggage and wanted to wait for the flight with Nancy, but she asked them to go home and not worry about her. I am always on the phone reassuring Stephen and Adriana daughter until they agreed. An hour and a half later, Nancy had gone through all the necessary checks and was standing at the front desk. The smile never left her face because she felt on top of the world, holding Kucherov's angels in her arms. When they announced boarding for the flight, Nancy's heart beat faster. She felt like the heroine of a movie who was setting off to meet her dreams. I've already forgiven him, Nancy thought. How could I not forgive him? For I love him. In this uplifted mood and with joyful thoughts, she went up to the cabin of the airplane. The stewardesses smiled welcomingly as they helped the passengers to their seats. In the cabin, there was an atmosphere of coziness and comfort, and the view from the window on snow-white clouds only strengthened the feeling of joy and serene style. Finally, the plane took off and the journey to Istanbul began. Nancy watched the cities and fields, and then the clouds pass beneath them. And with each passing hour, her excitement grew. Nancy showed her son what was happening behind the glass, the porthole telling different stories. And when the baby fell asleep, she herself did the same. At the same time, Topaz stood in front of the mirror in his apartment and looked at his reflection, seeing in it only an image of his past life, full of mistakes and regrets. He remembered those times when everything seemed possible and simple, when it seemed that his actions would not affect his future life. But the series of decisions he had made had led to loneliness and emptiness. Now, when halfway there was his wife and son, Rick realized that all his mistakes and wrong decisions had left a deep trace in his fate. He couldn't bring back the past and fix everything, but he could start all over again with a clean slate and try to redeem himself and Nancy, whom he had hurt badly. Landing in Turkey was another unforgettable moment for Nancy. When they stepped off the plane, she and Noah were greeted by warm and sunny air filled with the scent of flowers and the sea. Everything around them was so bright and colorful that Nancy couldn't help but smile. As they entered the arrivals area and she began to look for her luggage, she felt someone's gaze on her back. Turning around, Lulu quickly found the familiar, focused look of dark eyes in the welcoming crowd. Her husband, even after a year of separation, was still the same tall, slender man with dark hair only tanned and darker. Rick moved swiftly toward his wife and son and hugged them tightly, so embraced. They stood there for several minutes, not knowing what to say to each other. They silently picked up their luggage and moved towards the exit. That's how the little journey to Istanbul began, where every day was filled with new adventures, meetings, conversations, and unforgettable experiences. Although there were many more discoveries and adventures ahead, Nancy knew that this trip would be remembered forever and would be a pivotal one in their married life. He brought the family to his apartment overlooking the Bosphorus. There he took his son in his arms, and he began to walk around happily, as if he realized that it was his father. Rick played with the baby for a long time, and Nancy silently observed this family idyll. She asked if he had somewhere to put the boy to sleep, to which Rick silently pulled out a crib from behind the screen door. The furniture was obviously new. He must have bought it. Yesterday, thought Nancy, Stella and a crib to the favorite blankets Rick's parents had given her as she put the infant to bed, pre-fed him. She and her husband went to the kitchen to talk in the Turkish man's apartment. The kitchen was not just a place to prepare food, but a cozy corner to spend warm evenings. The walls were painted a delicate shade of ivory, creating an atmosphere of warmth and tranquility. In the center of the kitchen was a large wooden table, and small chairs stood around the table. Natural wood upholstered a floral print fabric on which Nancy and Rick sat across from each other. She glanced around the walls and noticed an antique clock, which with its end reminded her of the quickness of personality and time, and the need to appreciate every moment. Next to the clock was a painting depicting a summer landscape. It added freshness and brightness to the kitchen. I wonder if he thought he had purchased it himself, or if it was already hanging here. Casting a glance at the huge old gas boiler that took up most of the kitchen, it was unkept, even shabby, and reminded Nancy of the times when whole families would gather around it to keep warm and share news. Nancy interrupted the girls' musings. Rick, thank you for your son. Thank you for keeping the pregnancy alive. I realize you could have terminated it, being full of resentment towards me. Forgive me, please. I'm so sorry. In this year, I've grown, matured both physically and mentally. On my way to you before I even got on the plane, I realized I had forgiven you the moment I decided to pick up the phone when you called on the video link. Nancy rushed over to hug and kiss his spouse. Man, I didn't even expect you to be able to forgive me. Okay, let's close this topic and discuss our future, Nancy suggested, smiling. If you are ready to build it with us, with Noah, are you still hesitating? Rick was surprised. If I wasn't ready to build my future with you, I would never call you again. And the fact that we have a son has strengthened my desire to redeem myself to you is a good thing. But how are we going to live here or go back to Moscow? I'm not ready to live here permanently. I have a couple of business ideas and a friend with whom we're preparing a startup. If everything works out, the business will be here, and I can live anywhere in the world. What's the idea? Nancy wondered. I'm not telling you yet, and I'm not taking money from you. I have yet to get back what I took from you to fully restore my trust. But I don't want to live in Moscow either. I'm sorry. The big metropolis is not for me. I propose to think and move to a place where we both will be comfortable and where Noah will have a place to run and grow up happily," exclaimed. "If we live somewhere other than Moscow, then only there, where we met, where we were happy, where your homeland is, where there are boundless fields, where there are boundless landscapes, where we will be happy." "Exactly. So you agree with my idea?" "Sure, honey. I'll go to the end of the world with you, but not to Moscow." "Not Moscow," Rick laughed. "I'll fly to Russia with you to talk to your parents and apologize to them. Then I'll come back to settle things. In the meantime, you choose a house in Paralysed, where we'll move to, we'll rent, and then we'll buy our own." "No," Nancy interrupted her husband's speech. "We'll buy a house at once. I have money for it. I don't want to live in someone else's house and move from place to place several times." "All right. If it's more convenient for you, let's do it that way. But I'll buy everything for the house." "All right, as you say, conciliatory," said Nancy. "And tonight we'll go for a walk. You can show me and my son all the interesting things in Istanbul. One day won't be enough for us, so we'll stay here for a couple of days. We just have to tell our parents." "I'm so glad," said Rick, lifting his wife in his arms. "What are you doing here?" Nancy warned her parents that she would stay in Turkey for a week and then fly back with her husband. Stephen and Adriana weren't surprised, but they didn't let it show. Rick took some time off work to show all the beauties of Istanbul to his family. On the first day, they took the most popular route with a tour of the main attractions of Hagia Sophia and the Blue Mosque. Rick chose to travel by sea streetcars along the Bosphorus Strait. When they arrived at the pier as a family, they were the ones facing a 20-minute climb through the narrow streets of old Istanbul. Better to walk to get a sense of the city's atmosphere. Nancy was convinced by her husband when he suggested walking. After the walk, the travelers found themselves in the first part of the most important square of the city, Sultan Ahmed. This part consists of small squares with fountains and is surrounded on two sides by the main sites of Istanbul, Hagia Sophia and the Blue Mosque. The mosque made a big impression on Nancy. Rick told her that it is the first mosque in Istanbul, which is more than 400 years old, and it got its name because of the huge number of white and blue handmade pottery from Rostov. The whole family spent a long time wandering around both the temple and the mosque. Nancy had to dig around for now. Otherwise, she would not be allowed to visit the holy places. The next day, they went to Golhan Park. It is worth visiting because it is April, and this is the season of blossoms. Tulipanov told the previous night of Rick's wife. So Nancy learned that the capital of these flowers is not Holland, but Turkey. The husband knew so many interesting facts about this amazing country, which did not cease to amaze the girl. Tulips are the symbol of Turkey and favorite flower, Sultanov told, walking through the park Rick. Even the name he came up with here, and it comes from the name of the fabric for Turkish chumps. Honey, noticing the beds of roses, asked Nancy. It's not just tulips that grow in the park. How long has this park been here? It's practically the center of town. Yes, Genetsvale, taking his wife by the hand and stroking his son, who is in slang on the head, continued the story Rick Gull. KP is the oldest park in Istanbul. Look, over there is the Topkapi Palace complex. We're going there the other day, and the park was once part of the palace. The name translates into Russian as the Palace of Roses. In the spring and summer, it has over 80,000 roses in bloom, which are perfectly juxtaposed with gorgeous tulip beds. They ended their walk at the Ataturk Monument to the first president of the Turkish Republic. There, Noah's parents looked at the waves of the Bosphorus and made plans for a happy future where their family would grow. And the boy was getting brothers and sisters. During the week, Nancy saw many interesting things in Turkey. She visited many sites, among them Topkapi Palace, Suleimani Mosque, Maiden Tower, Cistern, Basilica, and many others. Before returning home, she was very nervous because she did not know how Rick's conversation with her parents would go, and more importantly, how his meeting with his parents would go. Robert was very scolding and spoke in Georgian, expressing to his son his dissatisfaction with his behavior. When they arrived in Moscow, they immediately went to Lena's apartment to meet her parents. Stephen and Adriana were already waiting for them, having sent Christopher and Molly to the birthday party of a neighbor boy. Otis, the head of the family, was very nervous and couldn't find a place to be, not knowing how to behave with a son-in-law who behaved like that. His wife told him to calm down and listen to everything Rick had to say, and only then decide whether to forgive him or not. He wanted to answer his wife, but not before the key turned in the door and they heard the familiar voice of his daughter and the shout of his grandson's shadow. A moment later, a tan Nancy appeared in the doorway, holding Noah in her arms, and behind her stood frozen in indecision Rick, holding their luggage in both hands. "Hello, daughter." Adriana broke the awkward silence. "How did you get here?" "Hi, Mom." At the parent and handing her grandchild to her, Nancy said, "We arrived well, without incident. We have a lot of news for you, and most importantly, gifts." "I can see that without incident," said Stephen contemptuously. "Everyone made it. No one got lost. No one disappeared." "Daddy Stephen," Adriana said warningly. "Hello, Rick. I'm sorry about your husband. He's very worried, as we all are, but we're ready to listen to you." "Hello," greeted the son-in-law of his wife's parents, closing the door and inviting them into the living room. "I won't talk long. There is no excuse for what I did. I know that Nancy has told you the reasons for my actions, but that in no way excuses me. I am a man, and this behavior is unbecoming." "That's a good point made by Stephen Otis. I do not even hope for your forgiveness, but I will try to restore faith in me as a worthy spouse of your daughter." Turning to his father-in-law, Rick said, "I will return all the money I stole from Nancy. Not immediately, of course, but within a year." "Mom, Dad," Nancy entered the conversation. "We decided to move to Paralysed, buy a house and live there as a family, build our lives independently." "Wait." Dumbfounded by the news, Stephen tried to understand how it was so quickly made another decision of the daughter. "You have not had time to reconcile with him, and are already making plans for the future. But he'll give me back the money he stole. Let him be thankful I didn't report him." "And then what? How will you be alone in another country?" Adriana asked, playing with her grandson. "Who will help you?" "I'm a big girl, especially as a mom," answered Nancy. "We'll help each other, especially since Rick is about to start a small business in Turkey, and I've wanted to write books for a long time. And I've already started taking notes to write some fairy tales for children. And we won't be in Georgia." One hugged his wife by the shoulders. Marlowe remarked, "My parents have settled there, who have retired and will no longer disappear on business trips. My uncle lives there, who, despite his age, will be happy to babysit his grandson. It's nature, mountain air, and my and Noah's little homeland." The conversation between Otis and Marlowe continued for several more hours. With each new remark, the attitude towards Rick changed for the better. But Stephen still feared for his daughter's feelings. He suggested they draw up a prenuptial agreement, which the young parents agreed to. And Rick also offered to write a receipt that he would return the money to his wife's father. By the end of the day, the younger Otis children returned and were happy to see their sister and nephew. And little Molly was even glad to see Rick, not understanding why Christopher was staring at Nancy Marlowe's husband like that. Realizing that it was necessary to explain himself to his wife's brother as well, took him to the dining room and there told him everything he thought necessary. After hearing a lot of negativity and threats in response, Rick silently offered his hand for a handshake, and the teenager shook it, thus showing that forgiveness is possible. That same day, the man went to his parents' house to hesitate in front of the apartment that Robert, Kevin, and Miranda rented every time they stayed in Moscow. He gathered his thoughts before he pressed the bell. The door was opened by his father, and he silently disappeared into the gloom of the apartment. Rick crossed the threshold, closed the door, and followed his father. There in one of the rooms, his parents were already waiting for him. There were no hugs, caresses, and kisses from his mom, which made the young man very sad. Looking at his mother, who was crying, turning away from her son, Rick realized that she was fighting her desire to hug him. Appearing, Robert interrupted the silence. "Kevin Ivik, and to you hello, father. Don't you dare call me that." Order's cold tone pronounced, "Daddy Rick, after what you have done, you are not my son." Robert pleaded with the young man's mother. "You can't do that. He's the only one." "No," Miranda contradicted Robert's wife. "You can't leave your wife in a foreign country on her honeymoon. You can't steal money. You can't leave your parents. You can't disappear without giving any news. And who did that? Who violated? You can't do that much. But that's our ex-son. Father, I realize I'm to blame. Don't you understand anything?" Robert Kevin cut off his son's sentence in mid-sentence. "You're not just to blame. Rick, you've dishonored me, my mother, my wife, and subsequently your son. I didn't mean to." As the Marlowe couple's son fell to his knees and began to sob, "I wasn't thinking about what I was doing. I wanted to sort out my financial difficulties and start a new life. I thought I didn't love my wife, but I was wrong. I didn't know Nancy was pregnant. God, I didn't know anything. I didn't even realize the consequences." Son came up to Rick's mother and put her arm around his shoulders. "There in the foreign land, I felt like I was king of the world. In my life began a new chapter," continued to confess to his parents Rick. "But once the realization came that money still had to be made, and I was so smart there, I wasn't the only one who realized I had done something stupid. And when came the realization that I missed Nancy and my parents, I began to think how to reappear in your lives and how to ask for forgiveness. It should ask first of all from my wife." In a calm voice said Robert Kevin Ivik, who silently listened to the speech of his son. "If she can forgive, then the others will try." "I have already forgiven," said Miranda, wiping away her tears. "You're my son, for what it's worth. And Camille has forgiven me," Rick said quietly, "even though I don't deserve it. She's a good woman, a wonderful mother, and as you can see, a wise wife." Praised his daughter-in-law, the young man's father. "She should be memorialized. After all you've done, she was able to forgive you." "I agree." Raising his eyes to his father, Rick said, "I'll try to get your respect back. I know it's gonna be hard." "We'll see," the man said conciliatingly. "Now tell me, what are your plans with Nancy?" The next conversation with my parents took place in a more cozy family atmosphere. They sat on the sofa, and the son in the armchair opposite them. They talked about various things, but the main topic was Rick's life in Turkey and his successes. His parents asked him about his job, his family, and his future plans. He was happy to answer their questions and share his plans. A young man and told them about their solid dreams and goals. Both Robert Kevin and Miranda were happy to hear about it. They supported him in all his endeavors and promised to help if needed. At the end of the conversation, the parents wished their son good luck and said they would always be there to help him. After the heart-to-heart talk with his parents, it was as if a stone had been removed from Rick's heart. Still, how important it is to be close to your parents. It's like you're incomplete without them, he thought on the way back to his hotel. After a couple of days, Rick had to return to Turkey to settle things, start a business with a friend, quit the hotel, rent an apartment, landlord, and send his things to Moscow. Marlowe himself moved into the hotel for the days when his presence was needed to organize the startup and initial tracking of the business. All the while, Rick missed his family madly. He was on the phone with, and many times a day, always via video call. He wanted to see both his son and his wife. Nancy, for her part, was looking for the right house for them, constantly sending options to her husband and discussing different purchase offers with her parents. Since Rick had to stay longer, he sent his wife a power of attorney to purchase the property. I drove with my father to Paralysed to buy the dream house, leaving my son in the care of his grandmother. The cab stopped near a red brick fence, behind which you can see a house of light stone, decorated with a mosaic of multicolored from posts, which glistened in the sun and shimmered with all the colors of the rainbow. Relaxing with the driver, Nancy and her father walked to the wicket beyond which awaited them the dream house they had purchased, which still had yet to be furnished, as Stephen had not yet seen the interior decoration. The daughter had decided to show her father just after the deal was done what was in her house. The first thing the man noted was that the lot was surrounded by green hills, and in the courtyard, vines were tightly intertwined with metal structures, creating several conversations in which it would be nice to hide from the sun on a hot summer day. "Stephen, what a beautiful house. You've already seen it in pictures, haven't you?" Nancy laughed. "We've driven by it. You've looked at it a few times." "Oh, my darling. It's one thing to look at a photo and speed past it." The man smirked and took a seat on a bench in one of the great conversations. "It's another to experience this atmosphere amongst the beauty in such a distinctive country." "I agree with that. Dad, let's go inside. The view from the living room window is amazing." "Come on, you intrigue me." And father and daughter started toward the house, following the paving stones across the spacious yard. Nancy was talking nonstop about the plants growing on the property, but Stephen's attention was attracted by a small fountain, which was located in one corner of the grand palace. Stopping at it, the man listened to the book murmur, "The tea of water that gave peace and coolness." Turning toward the house, Otis saw that Camille had opened the dark wood front door with an intricately patterned door, above which hung a large wrought iron lantern. As he approached the house, he noticed two large cypress trees standing like guards on either side of the entrance, guarding the peace and comfort of the house's occupants. Inside the house, there was plenty of space and light. The large windows were decorated with carved wooden shutters. The walls were sewn with wooden panels, and the floors were laid with noble wood, which gave the building the atmosphere of an old castle with a long history. In the living room, which was the center of the first floor, there was a large fireplace made of natural stone. There were comfortable armchairs and sofas where you could relax after a long day or warm yourself on cold winter evenings. The windows near the fireplace overlooked the backyard, where a large garden with fruit trees and vineyards. Along the paths leading to the garden were wooden benches, inviting you to relax and enjoy the beauty of the surrounding nature. The house was full of light and warmth, spacious and cozy. It reminded of the traditions and customs of ancient Georgia, filling the hearts of Nancy and Stephen with the joy of harmony and hope for the marital happiness that awaited Rick and Noah. Within these walls, the daughter exclaimed with wonder at Stephen, "It's really beautiful. It's a view you just sit back and enjoy. And the whole day is not an evening." And the satisfied Nancy plumped down in the chair and offered to sit in the neighboring chair. "When I saw these landscapes that opened from the windows of the house, I was even stronger in the decision to buy it." "Did Rick see it for himself?" "No," I whispered cryptically. "I haven't even shown him a picture, in case he does not like it," surprised the girl's father. "Such a house with a view of the mountains and a huge home garden." "I doubt it." Standing up from the chair and coming close to the window, Nancy continued, "Especially since he said he trusts me completely." "That's nice. Come on, let's go and show you the second floor," Stephen Otis suggested. "Let's go." A month after buying the house, the Marlowe family moved in completely. Nancy from Moscow brought a lot of things for herself and her son, and Rick from Turkey brought a lot of original interior decorations and several carpets that decorated the living room, bedroom, and 2 children's rooms. The couple had not yet finished decorating the guest rooms, as they were in a hurry to move. They still had to completely unpack, organize the living room and kitchen, as well as fix a few benches in the yard and get a dog. Rick really liked the house his spouse had chosen. He admired the new house and felt comfortable and cozy in it. He couldn't wait to start a new life in it, thought Rick, hugging his wife on the doorstep of their family nest. Every evening they walked around Paralysed, spent cozy sit-downs by the fireplace, admiring their garden and rejoicing at Noah's first steps and words. Rick loved to look at his wife, shrouded in a halo of tenderness and grace. Her movements were always fluid and graceful, as if she were floating on the ground rather than walking. Hair in soft waves, not falling on her shoulders, dwarfed the face, emphasizing its refined features. Eyes deep and penetrating looked at her son with kindness and wisdom. Around Nancy hovered an atmosphere of calmness and peace, as if the wife was a source of light and warmth for all who were near. Her presence made Tamara and Noah feel cozy and safe, and they felt protected and happy. Nancy felt strange and couldn't tell if it was from the euphoria and happiness from the move, or was it health-related. After sending her husband and son for a walk, she had taken a pregnancy test and was now sitting on the couch with her eyes wide open in surprise, holding the positive pregnancy test in her hands, and her heart was racing. She couldn't believe it. After all, they hadn't planned to have another baby so soon. But the news was unexpected and at the same time very joyful. After all, the dreams of a big family were becoming a reality. She felt overwhelmed with happiness and excitement for how Rick would react to the news. Going for a walk, father and son decided to have a great time. Rick is tall, slender, and was dressed in lightweight long pants and a shirt. And Noah, small and energetic, was in bright shorts and a t-shirt with the image of his favorite cartoon character. They stepped out of the house, and a world full of possibilities and adventure opened up before them. The air was fresh and cool, filled with the scent of flowers and herbs. The father was telling his son about the different things that surrounded them. The 1-year-old didn't understand everything, but he enjoyed every moment with his dad. Rick showed Noah trees, flowers, and birds, and explained how they lived and what they did. As they walked, they came to a park where there were many playgrounds and rides. There they enjoyed riding on the slides and swings. The father watched his son with a smile on his face, delighted with his happiness and energy. Eventually, the evening was coming to an end, and they returned home, tired but happy. This walk was a special memory for them that Rick will hold in his heart for the rest of his life. Upon returning home, Rick noticed his wife's nervousness and her desire to hide from him. But while she fed her son and put him to bed, he decided not to broach the subject. Rick's parents were happy. "And now we have to go." Getting up from the chair, said Robert. "Kevin Iovich, goodbye." "Goodbye." Dad and Mom said goodbye. Nancy, escorting her husband's parents to the door. Rick escorted the guests out. Coming. Called back the spouse from the kitchen on New Year's Eve. All Otis and Senior Marlowe came over for the holiday long weekend, Kaline and Rick. They decorated a large Christmas tree in the backyard with colorful balls, garland, and tinsel. On top of it was a bright star that sparkled against the dark sky. The tree was decorated with great taste and love. Each element of decoration was carefully selected and harmoniously combined with the rest. The balls were of different sizes and colors, from small, silver to large golden garlands glowed with multicolored lights, creating an atmosphere of festivity and magic. The meeting of the new year was stormy and joyful. Everyone was happy. Everyone was playing and wanted to rest not only their bodies but also their souls, which they did very well. 3 months after the new year, the first cry of Edrie Marlowe, whom her parents were waiting for, was heard in the Tbilisi Maternity Hospital. They had long ago decorated the second nursery, decorating it in a delicate pink light. Fairy tale characters and beautiful flowers were drawn on the walls. In the corner of the room stood a small white crib decorated with lace and boughs. Next to the crib was a nightstand, on which there were soft toys and rattles. The floor was covered with a fluffy carpet, so that the baby could crawl and play on it in the future, and on the window hung curtains of transparent fabric, through which the sunlight penetrated, making the room even more cozy. When night came, the stars lit up the dark sky. The young family gathered around the cradle of their newborn baby. They looked at him with love and tenderness, as if he were the most precious treasure in the world. As they lifted little Noah up and introduced him to his sister, Nancy, and Rick could not be overjoyed at their happiness. The room was quiet, with only the sleeping baby's quiet breathing barely audible to the young parents. The parents smiled as they looked at Eteri and hugged their eldest son tightly. They knew that their love and care would protect them from all the troubles and dangers that might come their way. So they stood with their lives bent over the cradle and looked at their little miracle that had brought so much joy and happiness into their lives. They realized that their lives would now be filled with new worries and joys, but they were ready for it. After all, what could be better than loving and caring for their babies? Darling. Setting his son down on the floor and taking his hand, Rick spoke on his way to the older child's room. I'm so excited to get to see the first few months of our daughter's life. I'm glad to have you around this time too. Nancy hugged her husband. I can't stop berating myself for abandoning you then, leaving you in that position, forcing you to make the difficult decision to carry alone, to give birth without your husband, putting you to sleep. Noah kept whispering to his wife, Rick, I will never get tired of apologizing to you. Don't. Covering the door to his son's room, he snuggled into his husband's chest. Nancy, don't take old wounds. It's all in the past. Now you're around, and we're happy. Yes, we are happy, and we always will be. Rick gave his wife a big, tight hug. So idyllically, they went to their room 40 days after the baby girl was born. Under the roof of Nancy and Rick's house, a noisy crowd of relatives and close friends had gathered for Terry's viewing party. The girls' parents invited all their near and dear ones to share the joy and show off their dark-haired and black-eyed and beautiful baby girl. The living room was decorated with balloons and garlands. Soft, quiet music was playing in the background, and a rich table was set in the center with vases of flowers in addition to food. Next to the fireplace was the small round crib where Terry also slept, snug in a soft blanket tied by her grandmother, Adriana. The guests approached the crib quietly, almost silently. To look at the baby and wish her health and happiness, they each brought a gift of a toy, clothes, books, or money. Nancy and Rick were happy to have such a celebration to share their joy with their loved ones and create memories that would be cherished for a lifetime. Thus began a new, but by no means the last chapter in the life of Nancy, Rick, Noah, and Terry. The young couple's dream of a large family didn't remain just a dream. 7 children were born into their family. Rick worked tirelessly, developing Turkish business and opening branches in Russia. Nancy wrote fairy tales for children, which were so well liked by one publishing house that it signed a contract with her and began to publish them in impressive editions. The children grew up to the delight of their parents. They were friendly and loved each other. On all holidays in their house gathered a noisy crowd, where everyone was a relative or close friend. Each year, the number of people invited grew. Christopher got married, grew older. Molly changed boyfriends often, looking for her man. Lisa married and had 2 children. And Stephen and Adriana Otis unexpectedly had John. And all of them, the friendly Marlowe family, was always a pleasure to have in our home.